I used to think the Appalachian backroads were the kind of places you passed through, not where you stopped. Winding, narrow ribbons of cracked asphalt that cut between steep, shadow-drenched hills and forgotten towns clinging to the edges of maps. But last October, I decided to take my RV deeper into that region than I ever had before. I wanted quiet, solitude, the kind you don't find at manicured campgrounds or tourist-laden parks. I wanted to disappear for a while, far from the hum of interstates and the glow of city lights. What I got instead was a kind of quiet I still hear in my dreams. I was traveling alone, 42 years old, recently divorced, with too much time and not enough direction. I'd outfitted my RV for long stretches off-grid, stocked with weeks of food, extra propane, and a satellite phone I told myself I'd never need. I'd spent the better part of a year roaming through campgrounds in the Smokies and Shenandoah, getting to know the rhythm of life in those hills. But this trip was different. I wasn't sticking to the parks or the places people write about online. I'd picked my route from an old backroads atlas, following faded lines and cryptic notes I found scribbled in its margins from whoever owned it before me. One entry, marked with a star in shaky handwriting, just said, "Hollow Creek, no services, keep quiet." By the time I turned off the main state road and onto that cracked blacktop, cell service had been gone for hours. My GPS spun uselessly. There was nothing but my rig, the low growl of its engine echoing off the rock walls, and those dense forests pressing in on both sides. The trees were so thick the late afternoon sun barely filtered through. It painted everything in dim copper light that made the world look stuck in permanent dusk. I passed one house, just one, in the first 20 miles. An old farmhouse slouched on a slope, its porch tilting so far forward I wondered how it hadn't collapsed. There was a truck in the yard, but no sign of anyone. Curtains hung limp in the windows. I didn't slow down. I didn't want to. By the time I reached Hollow Creek, it wasn't much more than a name. A dirt pull-off widened just enough for my RV, and a faint track disappeared between the trees. The atlas claimed there'd been a campground there once, decades ago, but if there had been, nature had reclaimed it. I parked anyway. The silence was intoxicating at first. No cars, no voices, no distant highway rumble. Just the chirr of insects and the occasional rustle of wind through the oaks. It felt like stepping back in time. I set up camp as the sun fell behind the ridge, making quick work of it. I'd learned better than to fumble with hookups or leveling blocks in the dark. When I finally settled into my chair outside with a mug of coffee, I realized just how far I'd come from anything resembling civilization. The night here wasn't like the night near towns or even parks. It was absolute. Stars burned so fiercely overhead they looked close enough to touch. The creek down the hill gurgled faintly, and beneath it all, something else. A hum. It was so low I almost missed it, like a vibration you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. I thought maybe it was my RV, maybe the fridge compressor or the inverter kicking in, but when I went inside and shut everything down, it didn't stop. It was coming from the woods. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a generator from one of those rare houses tucked in the hills, maybe distant machinery echoing strangely through the hollows. Sound does weird things in places like this. But it didn't fade, even as the night deepened. I went to bed restless, trying not to think about it. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to knocking. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, on the outside of my RV. I froze. My heart pounded so hard, I felt it in my throat. It wasn't the wind, wasn't an animal. It was the kind of sound you only hear from knuckles on metal. I lay there, holding my breath, straining to hear more. After what felt like forever, it came again. 3 more knocks. This time, closer to the back door. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by my bed and slid as quietly as I could to the window. My breath fogged the glass as I angled the beam out into the trees. Nothing. No footprints, no shadows, no movement. Just my own pale reflection staring back at me. Hello? My voice cracked when I said it. I didn't know why I spoke at all. Instinct, maybe? some desperate need to convince myself there was someone there I could reason with. But the woods didn't answer. I waited until dawn before I dared to open the door. I stepped out into the cool morning air, scanning for any sign that someone had been there. That's when I saw them. Handprints. On the side of my RV, just below the bedroom window, smeared faintly into the dust. They weren't distinct enough to show detail, but the size made my stomach knot. Too small for an adult. I should have left. Any rational person would have. But I told myself it was just kids from one of the scattered houses I'd passed, screwing around, and I'd driven so far to get here. So instead of packing up, I decided to push deeper. That afternoon, I hiked the old track that led from the pull-off into the woods. It wound for maybe half a mile before opening into a clearing. The remnants of the campground were still there. Concrete pads overtaken by moss, fire rings filled with rotted leaves, a collapsed bathhouse half swallowed by vines. It was eerie, but in a weird way peaceful, like stepping into a forgotten chapter of history. Then I saw it. At the far end of the clearing stood a wooden sign so weathered it was barely legible. The words Hollow Creek Campground clung faintly to its surface, and beneath them, crudely carved in what looked like a knife, "Leave before dark." I stood there staring at it, the air suddenly heavy in my lungs. That's when I noticed how still it was. The insects had stopped. The birds were gone. The only sound was that low hum again, pulsing faintly through the earth beneath my boots. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that carved warning. Long enough for the light to shift through the trees, for the edges of the clearing to sink into shadow, while the center still held on to that last pale stretch of sun. It was as if the woods themselves were waiting for me to decide what I'd do next. I told myself it was an old prank. Something some restless camper had carved years ago, long after this place was abandoned. But that didn't explain the hum in the ground or the silence in the air. It didn't explain why I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I turned back toward the track, forcing myself not to look over my shoulder. The hum seemed to follow me, vibrating faintly up my legs with every step I took, as though the earth itself had a pulse I could almost feel syncing with mine. By the time I got back to my RV, dusk was creeping over the ridge, draining what little warmth was left from the air. I told myself I'd eat, maybe build a fire, shake off the unease with something familiar. I even can convince myself to laugh about it quietly under my breath, as if mocking my fear would make it smaller. But as I lit the campfire and watched the flames lick higher, I realized I wasn't laughing anymore. The hum was louder now, not just through the ground, but in the air, as though it were leaking from the trees themselves. I stepped back, scanning the darkening woods. The tree line seemed closer than before, as if the forest had crept forward while I wasn't looking. The branches knotted together so thickly they looked almost like ribs, black against the fading light. That's when I saw the first light. It was faint, like a lantern swinging deep in the trees, too far to be clear, but close enough to be real. I thought maybe it was someone from one of those scattered houses. Maybe they'd seen my fire and were coming to check on me. I even called out, "Hello." My voice sounded strange, swallowed almost instantly by the woods. The lantern didn't answer. It just swayed, steady and slow. Then another light appeared, and another, until I counted 5. They flickered faintly, weaving between the trunks, always just far enough back that I couldn't see who or what held them. My fire crackled behind me, suddenly feeling too small, too thin. I took a step toward the RV, keeping my eyes on those lights, and that's when the humming deepened. It was no longer just a hum. It was a tone, low and resonant, threading between the trees in a way that made my stomach twist. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't wind. It sounded alive. I climbed into my RV and slammed the door, locking it out of instinct. The moment I did, the knocking started again. 3 knocks, but this time, it came from the roof. I froze, every muscle locking up. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't move, didn't even reach for my flashlight, just waited. The knocks came again, slow, measured, as if whoever or whatever it was knew exactly where I was standing. I snapped then. I shouted, "Get off!" my voice cracking loud in the tight space. But the sound that came back wasn't knocking. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate steps moving from the roof toward the rear of my RV. I grabbed my keys and started the engine. The roar of it shattered the silence like a gunshot. The footsteps stopped. For one heartbeat, everything was still. Then, just outside the driver's window, I saw a face. It was there and gone in an instant, pale and wide-eyed, features blurred in a way that didn't make sense. No flashlight beam, no lantern light. Just the dim reflection of my own dash lights catching it as it peered in. It was small, child-sized, but its proportions weren't right. I slammed the RV into drive and tore out of that pull-off so fast I nearly clipped a tree. The woods closed in around me, black and suffocating, branches scraping along the sides as I barreled down the narrow road. In my mirrors, I saw those lantern lights following, weaving through the trees at impossible speed, keeping pace no matter how hard I pressed the gas. I didn't breathe until the hum faded, until the lights vanished behind the curves of the road, until the trees finally thinned and the sky opened up enough to let the moon through. When I finally pulled over miles later, my hands shook so badly I could barely keep them on the wheel. That's when I realized something that my blood run cold. I made my blood run shield. Faint as breath against glass were 3 more handprints. I didn't stop driving until the road spat me out into a small town I'd never heard of. A single flickering streetlight, a gas station with 1 pump, and a diner with its sign half lit, buzzing like it was on its last legs. The kind of place that felt like it had been asleep for decades and didn't want to be woken up. I pulled the RV into the lot beside the diner and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there in the dark, breathing hard, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. The humming was gone. The woods were gone. It was quiet in the way that's supposed to be comforting, but wasn't. The silence here felt heavier, like the residue of something watching me even after I'd outrun it. The diner's neon sign flickered against my windshield. It read Ellis Fork Cafe, though the E was half dead, glowing faintly like it was struggling to hold on. I hadn't eaten since morning, and adrenaline had left me hollow. I needed people. I needed light. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and frying grease, like every diner I'd ever been in on every late-night road trip. There were maybe 4 booths total, a long counter lined with cracked vinyl stools, and one man behind it wearing an apron that looked older than I was. He glanced up when I walked in. "You lost?" His voice was flat, like this wasn't the first time someone like me had wandered in off the back roads looking like hell. "Yeah," I admitted. My voice sounded raw in my own ears. "Camped out by Hollow Creek last night." The man's hand stilled halfway to pouring a cup of coffee. His expression didn't change much, but something tightened in his eyes. "You shouldn't have stayed there," he said. I blinked. "You know it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid the cup toward me and leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on me like he was trying to decide whether to keep talking. "That campground's been closed since the 80s, he said finally. "Flash floods took out half the valley. Whole family drowned down there. Folks say sometimes they come back up the creek." The words hit me harder than I expected. I laughed nervously, shaking my head like I could shake off the image. I didn't see any creek, just woods, and lights, and knocking. The man didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "Yeah," he said simply. "Yeah?" I echoed. He reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and soft like it had been handled too many times. He set it on the counter and slid it toward me. It was a photocopy of an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Search for missing family called off. Hollow Creek Campground officially closed." Below the headline was a grainy black and white photo. 2 parents, a teenage boy, and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7. Her eyes, wide, bright, framed by dark hair cut blunt across her forehead, stopped me cold. I'd seen that face, the blurred proportions, the pale glow outside my window, the handprints. I pushed the paper back toward him with a trembling hand. "You ever see anything yourself?" He hesitated, then nodded once. Ain't just me. Anyone who lives out here long enough learns which roads to avoid after dark. But folks like you, driving in thinking it's just a campsite. He stopped, sighing. This place doesn't want visitors. Not the living kind. I sat there, staring down into my coffee, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. My skin crawled with the memory of those lantern lights weaving between the trees, the hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones, those handprints, small, faint, and undeniable. Best thing you can do, the man added quietly, is leave before nightfall. Don't take the same road out you came in on. Back roads don't always run the way they're supposed to. Something about the way he said it made my stomach knot. What do you mean? He glanced toward the window, out at my RV parked under that flickering streetlight. Roads here shift. You think you're heading out, but the woods got a way of folding back on themselves. People get turned around. Some don't make it back. I didn't touch my coffee after that. I just nodded, paid my tab, and walked back out into the cooling evening air with his words crawling in my head. When I climbed into my RV, I checked the windshield out of instinct. The handprints were still there. Only now there were more. 8 of them. Small, pressed faintly into the glass like condensation that never faded. I drove out of Ellis Fork without looking back. The road out felt wrong from the moment I left town. The streetlights vanished almost instantly, and the pavement narrowed until it was barely wide enough for my rig. I kept glancing at the GPS on my dash, even though it still spun uselessly, its compass jittering like it couldn't settle. Every mile I checked my mirrors. The handprints didn't fade. If anything, they seemed sharper, clearer, like breath on cold glass, even though the cab was warm. My headlights cut through a darkness so thick it looked solid, the kind of black that swallowed everything outside its beam. That's when I saw it, the sign. A weathered plank nailed to a tree, words carved deep in jagged letters. Hollow Creek, 2 miles. My chest seized. That wasn't possible. I'd left Hollow Creek hours ago. Ellis Fork was 20 miles behind me. But there it was, nailed into the trees like it had been waiting for me all along. I pressed the gas harder. The road twisted tighter, hairpin curves that seemed sharper than before, the kind where you can feel your tires grip just to hold you on the asphalt. Another sign appeared, this one older, barely hanging by a single nail. Leave before dark. But it was dark. The humming started again. The hum rolled through the RV like a living thing, so low it made the walls tremble. My teeth buzzed against each other, my hands numb on the wheel. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure, like the whole mountain was leaning closer, listening. I slammed my foot down harder, engine roaring, tires skidding as I tore through the switchbacks. The trees blurred into dark walls on either side, the headlights catching only glimpses of twisted trunks and skeletal branches reaching overhead like claws. Then, lights, not headlights, lantern lights. They appeared in the woods again, pacing me as I drove, weaving impossibly fast through the trees, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind. 5 of them at first, then 7. They darted between trunks in perfect unison, never breaking rhythm, never faltering, as though they weren't bound by roots or undergrowth or the rules of this world at all. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles splitting white. "No," I whispered through my teeth. "No, no." The hum deepened. My dash lights flickered. For one sickening second, everything in the RV went dark. Engines silent, lights dead, until I could see nothing but the glow of those lanterns floating outside. Then, with a violent shudder, the power snapped back. The headlights flared bright, and in that searing moment of illumination, I saw something standing in the middle of the road. A girl. The same one from the clipping. From my window. Her head tilted slightly to the side, eyes wide and black as oil. Her skin was pale, bluish in the beams, lips parted as though she just stepped out of the water. I yanked the wheel. Tires screamed against the pavement. The RV swerved hard, nearly tipping before slamming down again. I tore past her, breath ragged, heart clawing up my throat. I checked my mirror. Nothing. She was gone, but the handprints had spread. They covered the inside of the windshield now, faintly glowing in the dashlight, overlapping and smearing like dozens of small hands had pressed themselves there in desperation. The road curved sharply again, and that's when I saw it. The Hollow Creek sign. The same one as before, same carving, same splintered wood nailed into the tree. I hit the brake so hard I felt the seatbelt cut into my chest. I wasn't escaping, I was looping. No matter how far I drove, the road dragged me back. The hum was deafening now. It thrummed in my bones, my skull, in every nerve. My vision blurred. My breath came shallow, ragged, and beneath the hum I heard it, knocking. 3 knocks on the roof, then 3 more on the door, and then the windows, everywhere at once. It was deliberate, measured. A rhythm I felt in my chest as much as I heard in my ears. I gripped the wheel, trembling, staring at the dark road ahead. The RV lights flickered again, and in that stuttering glow, I caught a glimpse in my side mirror. Faces pressed against the glass from the outside. They weren't solid. Their edges blurred and warped, features soft like wet clay. Too many of them, overlapping, shifting in and out of focus. Adults, children. That same little girl at the center, like her mouth slowly opening wider and wider until the windshield cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spread outward from one of the glowing handprints, glass bowing inward like something was pushing from the outside in. I threw the RV into reverse, tires spitting gravel as I jerked it around. My only thought was speed, raw, blind speed. The lanterns darted alongside me, weaving closer, now almost brushing the edge of the road. Through the corner of my eye, I swore I saw shapes holding them, pale arms, damp hair, silhouettes that stuttered like they were caught between frames of film. I floored it. The hum hit a fever pitch, vibrating so violently I thought my bones might snap. I felt my hands slipping on the wheel, my breath hitching, my vision tunneling nothing but the 2 lanes of cracked pavement ahead. And then, sudden silence. The hum stopped. The lanterns vanished. The windshield cleared. I was alone. The RV coasted to a halt, engines still idling. I sat there, shaking so badly I couldn't move, staring out at a stretch of road that looked utterly normal. Quiet. Still. I turned off the engine, listened. Nothing but the faint hiss of cooling metal. I opened the door, half expecting to see those pale shapes waiting for me in the dark. But the air was calm, night sounds slowly returning, crickets, distant owls, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as if nothing had happened at all. Except for the sign. It stood just beyond my headlights, leaning slightly under its own rot. Letters carved deep. Leave before dark. This time I did. I didn't stop driving until I crossed state lines the next morning, the Appalachians shrinking in my mirrors like something I'd imagined. I only stopped then because exhaustion left me no choice. I pulled into a rest stop off the highway and collapsed in my bed, still fully dressed, hand trembling as I locked every door twice. When I woke hours later, sunlight pouring through the windows, the handprints were gone. But on my dashboard, written in the thin layer of dust I hadn't touched since I'd set out, were 3 words etched by something small. Come back soon. I didn't drive back into the Appalachians for weeks. Every time I even glanced toward those mountains on a map, something in my chest tightened like the memory itself carried weight. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, some long chain of bad coincidences compounded by the isolation of those back roads. That's what any reasonable person would have told themselves. But then I'd see it. Out of nowhere, in the reflection of a gas station window or the gleam of a rain-streaked mirror, the faint impression of a small handprint, too high to be mine, too low to be anything but deliberate. I tried to ignore it. I washed my RV 3 times, buffed every inch of the glass until it gleamed. For a while that seemed to work. The handprints stayed gone. The hum stayed gone. But every night I lay in bed, I could still hear it in the back of my skull. The low, bone-deep vibration that had shaken me to my core out there in those woods. The silence after it stopped was worse. I told my story once to a fellow camper I met at a park outside Knoxville. His name was Drew, mid-50s, quiet in the way of someone who'd seen enough miles not to waste words. He didn't laugh when I told him. He didn't even blink. "You found Hollow Creek," he said simply, nodding like it was an address he knew by heart. I remember staring at him, stunned. "You know it?" He shrugged. "Not that place exactly, but I've heard the name. Up and down the range, you hear different ones. Hollow Creek, Black Elk Hollow, Red Gate, different towns, same kind of stories, folks vanish, roads that don't run straight, lights in the woods." He leaned back in his camp chair, the firelight flickering against his face. "You ever wonder why half these little towns don't even show up on GPS? Like they're there one day and gone the next?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to. He smiled then, but it wasn't kind. "You learned something out there. You felt it. The Appalachians don't like to be crossed in certain places. They hold on to what's theirs. And if you wander too far down the wrong road..." He trailed off, sipping his beer, letting the thought hang heavy in the dark between us. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't, because he was right. I had felt it, that presence, that weight of being somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't just fear of being alone or lost or stalked by something I couldn't see. It was the feeling that I'd been noticed. Claimed even, if only for a night. And yet the worst part of me, the restless part that drove me down those forgotten roads in the first place, keeps wondering what would have happened if I hadn't left. I keep thinking about that diner in Ellis Fork, the yellowed clipping, the man who told me to leave before dark. The way his eyes had lingered just a moment too long on the door before I went out, like he wanted to warn me of something he couldn't say out loud, or maybe he knew it wouldn't matter. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about RV camping in the Appalachians. It's not like anywhere else. The roads wind differently. The towns sit too quiet, their windows blank, their porches sagging under years of silence. You'll pass through places where every house looks empty, but the curtains shift when you drive by. You'll see signs for campgrounds that aren't there anymore, their entrances swallowed by trees, their histories buried with the people who never came back. And if you stay long enough, if you listen closely enough, you'll feel it too. The hum under your feet, the silence where birds should be. The weight of those hills pressing in, old and patient and deep as time itself. I tell this story not because I think you'll believe me, but because I need you to remember one thing. If you ever take your RV down those roads, when you see a weathered sign carved into a tree that says, "Leave before dark," you turn around. No campsite is worth ignoring it. No quiet night or empty valley is worth testing whatever those back roads keep locked away. Because out there, beyond the reach of cell towers and streetlights, the line between past and present blurs. The dead don't always stay where they're buried, and some roads don't bring you home. They bring you back. I haven't returned to Hollow Creek. Not yet, but I dream about it sometimes. The girl's face in the glass, the lanterns weaving through the trees, the hum rising until it felt like it was hollowing me out from the inside. When I wake from those dreams, my RV is still. My doors are locked, the windows are clear, but every now and then in the faintest breath of dawn light, I see it again, one small handprint pressed into the glass. If you ever find yourself on those back roads, remember this. Not every campground on a map is meant for the living. And if you feel that hum beneath your feet, if you hear knocking that no one answers, don't wait for an explanation. Don't rationalize it. Get in your RV. Start the engine. Leave before dark, because some places in the Appalachians don't just watch you pass through. They wait for you to come back. I didn't realize how far we'd driven until I checked the gas gauge and saw it hadn't moved. We'd left Sandpoint, Idaho that morning, the sky a gray wash that looked like rain but never broke. Danny sat in the passenger seat of our old Volkswagen Westfalia, barefoot, her knees pulled up, staring out the window the way she always did on drives through the mountains. She liked to name things she saw, creeks, bends in the road, even the silhouettes of ridge lines. "That one looks like a sleeping bear," she said once, pointing at a line of peaks half buried in mist. I smiled, kept my eyes on the narrow road curling ahead, but it had been hours since we'd passed another car. No campgrounds, no mile markers, no signs. Just endless forest pressing in on both sides, spruce and cedar so thick they blotted out most of the light. The hum of our tires was steady, hypnotic. I thought it was just one of those forgotten logging roads Idaho's full of, remote but harmless. We liked those places, the ones far enough off-grid to feel like no one else existed. That was part of why we'd hit the road in the first place, to get away from the noise. But by late afternoon, I realized I couldn't remember turning off the main highway. I couldn't even picture which junction we'd taken. "Do you know where we are?" I asked. Not because I thought Danny was paying attention to the map. She never did. But because I wanted to hear something human in that silence. She blinked, glanced at me like I'd asked her something strange. "What do you mean? You're the one driving." "Yeah, but I don't remember this road." Her brow furrowed. "Sure you do. I've been here before." That caught me off guard. I didn't remember her saying anything like that earlier. "You have?" "Yeah." She said it softly, almost distractedly, tracing a fingertip along the fogged window. "Not awake, though, in a dream." I laughed, but it sounded forced. "Great, so now we're navigating based on your subconscious?" She didn't answer right away, and when she did, her voice had that faraway quality I hated. "It looks exactly the same." I told myself she was just playing around, that Danny sometimes liked to romanticize weird little moments. But my GPS wasn't helping. No matter how many times I refreshed it, the blue arrow stayed stuck, spinning. No cell service. Just a thin red line of a road labeled FR 221, which I didn't recognize, looping endlessly when I zoomed out. By dusk, something about the air changed. It grew colder even though the heater was running, and there was this smell, like wet pine needles, metallic almost, sharp in my nostrils. Danny unbuckled and slid into the back to dig through our food bin, humming under her breath. It was a tune I didn't know, but it sounded like something half-remembered, broken. "You hungry?" she asked. I shook my head, even though I hadn't eaten all day. My hands were tight on the wheel. "We should find a place to pull over soon." She froze like she'd been waiting for me to say that. "You don't stop on this road?" she said, her tone flat, like a rule she didn't want to explain. I laughed again, but this time it was more brittle. "Since when?" Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "Since I dreamed it." We didn't stop. Night came fast in those trees, like it always does when you're deep in the mountains, but it felt heavier somehow, pressing against the windows. Our headlights carved a narrow tunnel of visibility ahead, and beyond that was nothing. No sky, no stars, just darkness so thick it seemed to absorb the beams. I caught myself leaning forward, squinting, searching for the next bend in the road, like if I stared hard enough it would give up its secrets. And then something darted across the light. It was quick, a flicker of motion too fast to catch, but it was upright, human-shaped. I hit the brakes instinctively and the van jolted to a stop. Danny sat up straight. "What?" she asked, but I couldn't answer. My pulse was hammering. I peered ahead. Nothing. No movement, no tracks in the dirt. The forest stood perfectly still. "Probably just a deer," I said, forcing the words out. "That wasn't a deer." Her voice was steady, certain. I didn't like that certainty. We drove on. I don't know how long. Time felt elastic, stretching and snapping. Danny dozed off in the back at some point, her breathing soft and rhythmic, and I envied her ability to sleep through this. My gas gauge hadn't moved, not a fraction. My rational brain told me it was broken, but another part of me, the part that kept glancing at the black tree line, didn't buy it. When the road finally widened, almost imperceptibly, I pulled over despite what she'd said. My body needed a break. My legs were stiff. I killed the engine, stepped out, and the cold hit me like a wall. The forest smelled stronger now, wet earth, sap, that same metallic tang. My breath fogged. It was silent in a way that made my skin crawl. Not quiet, silent. No wind in the branches, no distant owls or insects. Just nothing. I circled the van, stretching my legs, shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam barely cut 10 feet before vanishing into dark. That's when I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible, like someone whispering from far away. I froze. It came again. A hiss of syllables I couldn't parse, slipping through the stillness. I turned, heart pounding, scanning the woods. Nothing. Just that suffocating darkness. When I climbed back into the van, Danny was sitting up. She looked at me, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard. "You heard it too, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She crawled forward, laid her hand on my shoulder. "We just have to keep driving. It doesn't stop if we don't." "What doesn't stop?" I demanded, but she didn't say. Instead, she sat back down, pulled a blanket over her legs, and whispered, "You weren't in it before." The words lodged in my brain like a splinter. I started the van. We drove on. The hum of the engine felt louder now, almost intrusive, like it was the only thing tethering us to reality. My hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles pale, but I couldn't let go. Every time I thought about stopping again, Danny's words replayed in my head. "You weren't in it before." I wanted to ask her what she meant, but something in her expression told me she wouldn't answer straight. She was sitting sideways in the passenger seat now, legs tucked beneath her, just staring at the endless road ahead with this strange calm, like she'd settled into a memory I didn't share. "Danny," I said quietly. She hummed in response, not looking at me. "How long have you been dreaming about this road?" A pause. Then, "Since I was a kid." That didn't make sense. Danny was from Texas. She'd never even been this far north until we hit the road together 6 months ago. "So how do you know it's this road?" She turned then, her gaze steady and unsettling, "Just because I remember what comes next." The air in the van felt thinner suddenly, like the walls had closed in. "What comes next?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and switched off the headlights. The darkness swallowed us instantly. I slammed my foot on the brake without thinking. The van lurched to a stop and I spun toward her. "What the hell are you doing?" "Just wait," she said, almost tenderly, as though she were trying to soothe me. "You'll see it better this way." And then, far down the road, something glowed. It wasn't headlights, not a car, not even fire. It was a pale bluish shimmer, low to the ground, like fog lit from within. It pulsed once, then steadied, hovering in the middle of the dirt track maybe a quarter mile ahead. "What is that?" I whispered, even though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. Her lips curved in a small, almost wistful smile. "I've never gotten this close before." Before I could stop her, she opened the door and stepped out barefoot, the gravel crunching softly under her feet. "Danny," I scrambled after her, my flashlight beam cutting through the cold. The smell hit me harder this time, sharp and metallic like rust or blood mixed with wet pine. My stomach knotted. She kept walking, unbothered by the cold or the silence, eyes locked on that glow like it was pulling her forward. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing unnaturally against the trees, like it came back warped. "You don't even know what that is." She didn't stop. I ran up, grabbing her arm. Her skin was icy. "Listen to me. This isn't safe. We don't even know where we are." She turned to me slowly, her expression soft but unsettling. "I told you. I've been here before." Her words carried this strange weight, like they weren't entirely hers. The glow ahead of us flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw movement inside it. Shapes, thin and angular, sliding past each other like shadows behind glass. I pulled her back toward the van, heart hammering. "We're leaving. Now." But she didn't resist. She let me drag her, though her eyes stayed fixed on the glow until we climbed back in and slammed the doors. The engine started on the first turn of the key, almost too easily. The gas gauge still hadn't moved. I flipped the headlights on and floored it, driving faster than I should have on a road like that, dirt kicking up behind us. The glow didn't recede. No matter how far we drove, it stayed at the same distance ahead, hovering, waiting. Danny didn't speak. She just stared. At some point, I noticed something strange. We hadn't passed a single landmark. No downed logs, no pull-offs, nothing I could recognize to orient myself. It was like the same quarter mile of forest was repeating, over and over, wrapped around us like a loop. I gripped the wheel tighter. "This isn't possible," I muttered. "It's not supposed to be." Danny said softly. I glanced at her. What does that mean? She turned to me, eyes gleaming faintly in the dashlight. I think you followed me in here. The words chilled me deeper than the night air. Followed you where? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Into my dream. I wanted to argue, wanted to laugh it off, but deep down, something ugly twisted in my gut because part of me believed her. Because nothing else explained any of this, the broken GPS, the looping road, the gas that never ran out. Danny, I said, forcing my voice steady, you need to tell me how we get out. She looked forward again, her expression unreadable. You don't. The silence that followed felt alive, crawling over my skin. I drove faster. It must have been hours, my hands ached, my vision blurred, but we never caught up to that glow, never passed anything new. At one point I noticed something else. There were no stars, no moon, just a ceiling of black pressing down. Then, without warning, Danny whispered, "Stop." I glanced at her. Why? She nodded ahead. Because this is where I usually wake up. I eased my foot off the accelerator, and the van coasted to a stop in the middle of the dirt road. The glow ahead of us pulsed once, brighter now, almost beckoning. Danny leaned forward, resting her elbows on the dash, staring at it with the kind of quiet reverence you'd give a sunrise or an old church. Usually, I repeated, my voice low, almost drowned out by the ticking of the cooling engine. What do you mean usually? She didn't answer right away. Her fingers traced small circles against the fogged windshield, leaving streaks in the glass. When I was little, she said finally, I used to dream about this road every few months. I'd wake up right about here, always before the glow got close. And tonight? Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm still asleep. The words hung there, dense and heavy. My stomach dropped like a stone. Stop screwing with me, I said, forcing a laugh that cracked halfway through. I reached over and grabbed her wrist gently, grounding myself in the cold, real feeling of her skin. We're awake. I'm awake. You're awake. This is real. She turned to me then, and for the first time since we'd started down that road, she looked scared. Not playful, not distant, genuinely frightened. Don't you get it? She said, her voice trembling. You're only here because I dreamed you this time. I pulled back instinctively, like her words had teeth. That's insane. We've been together for years. We live in this van. Not here, she interrupted sharply. Here's different. You weren't in this dream until tonight. The glow ahead pulsed again, brighter now, throwing faint shadows against the tree line. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat prickled along my back. Okay, I said, swallowing hard. Then what's in there? What happens if you don't wake up? She didn't answer, and I hated that silence more than anything. I twisted the key, restarting the engine, and the van's headlights cut through the dark like blades. I floored it, tires spitting gravel as we lunged forward. Danny didn't stop me this time. She just sat there, pale and rigid, as we closed the distance between us and that impossible light. The forest seemed to tighten around us the closer we got, trees leaning in, branches knitting together overhead like ribs closing around a heart. The smell intensified, damp pine, rot, that metallic tang biting at the back of my throat. Then I realized something horrifying. I couldn't hear the engine anymore. The van was still moving, but the steady rumble beneath my feet was gone, replaced by a low, thrumming vibration that I felt more than heard. I glanced down. The RPM needle was dead, even though the speedometer ticked higher. What's happening? I shouted over the silence. Danny's voice was calm, almost resigned. We're close now. The glow expanded suddenly and swallowing the road ahead until there was nothing else. No dirt, no trees, just a flat horizon of blue-white light that shimmered like heat haze. I slammed the brakes. The van skidded to a halt just at the edge, headlights swallowed whole. I stared out the windshield, my pulse roaring in my ears. It wasn't fog, it wasn't light. It was thin, like the air itself had peeled back, revealing something vast and empty beyond. Shapes moved inside it, long-limbed silhouettes that slid against each other soundlessly, their forms wrong, bending in ways my eyes didn't want to follow. I gripped the wheel tighter, breath coming fast. Danny, I said, my voice shaking, We're turning around. Right now. She didn't move. Her gaze was locked on the shimmer, and tears streaked silently down her face. I used to wake up, she whispered, and then she opened the door. Danny! I lunged, grabbing her arm as she swung her feet down onto the gravel. The cold blasted in, sharp and biting. Get back in the van. She turned, her face streaked with tears but smiling faintly, like she was seeing something I couldn't. You don't understand. It wants me back. She pulled free before I could stop her and stepped toward the light. Panic flooded me. I jumped out after her, my boots crunching on gravel, air freezing my lungs. The glow was brighter now, almost humming, pulling at me like static electricity, prickling my skin. Danny was only a few steps ahead, walking barefoot toward it with slow, dreamlike movements. I grabbed her again, spinning her toward me. You're not going in there, I shouted. My voice echoed unnaturally, stretching too long like it was bouncing off walls I couldn't see. She stared at me, her face inches from mine. Then wake me up, she said. I froze. Her eyes, pleading, terrified, locked onto mine. Please, she whispered. I don't know how to wake up if you don't. And before I could answer, something in the glow shifted. One of those thin, angular shapes slid forward, closer to the edge, and for the first time I saw its face, or what passed for one. A featureless oval, pale and smooth, with no eyes, no mouth, but I felt it watching us. Danny gasped and stumbled back, clutching my arm. The thing reached out, its limbs stretched impossibly far, dipping through the barrier like liquid light, its fingers, or claws, or something worse, brushing the gravel just feet from where we stood. I yanked Danny toward the van, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Run! We scrambled back, slamming the doors behind us. I floored it in reverse, tires squealing, gravel spraying. The light dimmed behind us, but not fast enough. That thrumming vibration followed, crawling through the metal frame, deep in my bones. And then the road shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment we were barreling backward, and the next the van jolted violently like we'd hit something unseen. My vision went white. When it cleared, we were moving forward again. The glow was gone. The trees were still there, the road the same as it ever was, but the dashboard clock read 3:07 a.m. Danny sat rigid beside me, staring straight ahead, her hands knotted in her lap. Neither of us spoke. The first thing I noticed was her breathing, too steady, too measured, not the uneven, shaken rhythm I'd expect after what just happened. I kept my hands locked on the wheel, driving blind through the dark forest. The headlights cut a narrow path through the pines, but everything outside that cone was pure blackness, swallowing the edges of the world. I didn't dare check the GPS. I already knew what it would say. Nothing. You okay? I asked, my voice low, careful, as if testing ice I wasn't sure would hold. She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, I feel lighter. I glanced at her. She was staring out the passenger window, her face half lit in the glow of the dashboard, lips curved in a faint, contented smile that didn't match the night we just crawled through. Lighter? I repeated. She nodded slowly, then turned her head toward me. Her pupils were wide, swallowing almost all the color of her irises, like someone whose eyes hadn't yet adjusted to light. Like I finally belong here. A chill ran through me. I forced a shaky laugh. Well, good news, I guess. Now all we need to do is figure out how to get off this road. Her smile faltered just slightly. Who says we should? My fingers tightened on the wheel. What's that supposed to mean? She looked back out the window, resting her head against the glass. It's always been here, you know? Waiting. I used to wake up right before the end, but now I don't think I want to. The way she said it made my stomach twist. I watched her from the corner of my eye, her breath fogging the glass, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and realized she hadn't blinked in a long time. I pressed my foot harder on the gas, needing speed, movement, something. The van hummed steadily, and I glanced down at the gauge, praying it had finally dipped. It hadn't. The needle still sat pinned at full. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tighter. We're getting out of here, I said firmly, maybe more to myself than to her. We'll find a junction, a sign, something. This road has to end. Her voice was quiet but sharp. cutting through my determination. It doesn't end, it loops. I turned sharply toward her. What did you say? She smiled again, faint but knowing. I told you, I've been here before. I almost slammed on the brakes right then, but something stopped me. Something primal, animal. Because part of me didn't want to be trapped in silence with her any more than I wanted to be trapped on this road. Instead, I stared ahead, jaw clenched, trying to ignore the way her words crawled under my skin. That's when I saw it. A road sign. It was the first thing we'd passed in hours. White metal, reflective paint glinting in the headlights. I nearly shouted in relief as we approached, slowing just enough to read it. But there were no words, just an arrow pointing straight ahead beneath which someone had scrawled in thick black spray paint. Wake up! I hit the brakes. The van screeched to a halt, gravel spraying out from under the tires. I stared at the sign, my breath coming fast. Danny leaned forward slightly, her face unreadable. Do you see that? I asked. Yes. Her voice was calm, almost soothing. It's for you. I turned to her, heart hammering. What does that mean? For me? She didn't answer. I stared back at the sign, then slammed the gear shift into reverse, throwing us backward down the dirt road. Danny didn't protest. She just sat there, watching me, her hands folded neatly in her lap as the forest blurred by. We must have reversed for miles, but the trees never changed, and when I finally slammed to a stop and turned forward again, my stomach dropped. The sign was still there. Wake up! I could feel Danny's gaze on me now, heavy and constant. You can't leave, she said softly, almost like an apology. Not until I dream you out. I turned to her, anger bubbling over my fear. What the hell does that mean, Danny? You're not making any sense. Her lips curled into that faint, serene smile again. It's not Danny anymore. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook on the wheel. What did you just say? She tilted her head slightly, like a bird listening to distant music. She woke up. I stayed. The air inside the van felt suddenly too thin, pressing against my chest, suffocating. I floored it forward without thinking, needing distance, escape, anything. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just Danny's dream anymore. It was mine now, too. I floored it until the speedometer needle trembled against the red line, the van rattling so hard I thought it might tear apart. Trees blurred into streaks of shadow. My breath came fast and sharp, every inhale scraping my lungs. Beside me, she sat perfectly still, that serene smile painted across her face like it had been sewn there. The sign vanished in the rearview mirror, swallowed by darkness, but I knew it would come back. Everything here came back. Danny? I said, my voice shaking but loud over the roar of the tires. If this is a dream, then tell me how to wake up. Tell me. She didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her pupils swallowing her irises completely now, two pools of black. You can't wake up if you don't believe you're asleep. My grip on the wheel tightened until my hands ached. This isn't happening. This isn't. You think that's what I told myself? Her voice was gentle, almost pitying. I used to say that, too, every time I reached the glow, every time I turned back. But I always came here again. I wanted to scream. Instead, I jerked the wheel hard to the left, veering off the dirt road and straight into the trees. Branches snapped against the van's sides like bones breaking, the headlights bouncing wildly through the undergrowth. Her smile didn't falter. The van jolted violently, throwing me against the wheel, and then, without transition, we were back on the road. Smooth, straight, silent. I slammed the brakes, chest heaving. No, I muttered, slamming the gear shift into park. I shoved open the door and stumbled out into the freezing air. My flashlight beam cut through the trees, weak and thin, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay in the van with her another second. The silence outside was suffocating. No insects, no wind, nothing but my own ragged breaths echoing back to me too loudly, like the forest was hollow. Behind me, the passenger door clicked open. I spun. She stepped out slowly, barefoot on the gravel, that same tranquil expression fixed on her face. Stop following me, I shouted, flashlight trembling in my grip. I'm not following you, she said simply. You're following me. Her words hit like a hammer. I stumbled back, my boots crunching against the dirt. "You're not her," I said, the truth clawing its way up my throat. "What are you?" Her head tilted slightly, unnaturally far, the movement jerky, inhuman. And then she smiled wider, too wide, her teeth sharp and too many. "I'm what was always here." My flashlight flickered. The glow was back, faint at first, then blooming brighter behind her like it had been waiting for this moment. It painted her silhouette in blue-white light, and I realized her shadow didn't match her body. It was taller, thinner, twisted. I ran. I didn't think. I just bolted down the road, gravel scattering beneath my boots. My flashlight beam danced wildly, carving a narrow slice through the dark. My lungs burned, the cold slicing at my throat, but I didn't stop. The glow followed. It didn't move like light should. It loped forward in pulses, closer each time I dared a glance back. And her footsteps, barefoot, impossibly quiet, kept pace with mine, no matter how fast I pushed. "Wake up!" I screamed into the trees, my voice cracking. "Somebody wake me up!" The forest swallowed my words. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually my legs gave out. I stumbled, hit the ground hard, palms scraping against gravel. The flashlight clattered out of my grip, its beam spinning across the dirt before winking out. When I looked up, she was standing over me. Her face was serene again, perfectly human now, but her eyes, those endless black eyes, pulled at me, dizzying and bottomless. "You can't fight it," she whispered, crouching down so close I felt her cold breath on my cheek. "You followed me in. You stay until I dream you out." I shoved back, scrambling upright, my legs shaking beneath me. "Then dream me out, please." Her smile softened. I already did. And then everything shattered. The road split beneath me, fracturing like glass. Light poured through the cracks, blinding, searing. My body went weightless, like I was falling without end. I heard her voice, distant, echoing, threading through the rush of wind. "Next time," she said, "don't follow me." I woke up gasping in the van. Sunlight cut through the windshield. The dashboard clock read 7:42 a.m. Birds sang faintly outside. I turned, shaking, heart hammering. The passenger seat was empty. Her shoes were gone. Her bag, everything. Only the faint smell of pine lingered in the air, sharp and metallic, burned into my lungs. I sat there for what felt like hours, hands trembling against the steering wheel, sunlight spilling over the dashboard like it was mocking me. My body ached like I'd been running for days. Sweat clung cold to my skin. Dani was gone. Her blanket lay crumpled in the back seat, and on the window where she'd rested her head, a faint smudge of fog still clung like a fingerprint from a ghost. I grabbed my phone. Signal bars flickered weakly to life. GPS loaded. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a location. Highway 95, 20 miles south of Sandpoint. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. I drove. The forest thinned gradually, the road widening, sunlight spilling between the trees in bright, innocent strips, but my hands stayed locked on the wheel like I was still in that dream. Every few miles, I checked the passenger seat, half expecting her to be there, smiling that calm, alien smile. She wasn't. By the time I reached Sandpoint, my fuel gauge still hadn't moved. I pulled into a gas station, hands shaking so badly I could barely unscrew the cap. The clerk looked at me strangely, but I didn't care. I just needed to see something normal. I needed to hear a voice. I filled the tank. It didn't take a single drop. That night, I checked into a motel. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the van. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and sat on the bed staring at my phone, trying to find her. Missing persons reports, social media, anything. There was nothing. No sign Dani had ever been anywhere near Idaho. When I finally slept, it didn't feel like sleep. I woke at 3:07 a.m. The clock glowed red in the dark room, the same time it had been in the van when the glow vanished. My mouth was dry, my chest tight. That's when I heard it. Faint, distant, a whisper sliding through the still air. It sounded like my name. I sat up sharply, heart pounding. It came again from just beyond the motel window. I forced myself out of bed, each step slow, deliberate, my feet silent on the carpet. I pulled back the curtain. The parking lot was empty. Moonlight pooled across the asphalt, bright and pale. My van sat where I'd left it, its windows dark, and then I saw it. Across the street, nailed crookedly to a telephone pole, was a road sign. White metal, reflective paint, catching the glow of the moon. FR 221. My stomach flipped. I blinked, and it was gone. I staggered back, slamming the curtains shut, my breath ragged. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, I drove south, out of Sandpoint, out of Idaho entirely. I didn't care where, I just needed distance. But no matter how far I went, every few hours I'd see it again. A flash of white at the roadside, a crooked metal sign with FR 221 stamped across it in block letters, always in my peripheral vision, always gone when I turned my head. I tried to tell myself it was stress, that I hadn't slept, that my brain was just chewing on trauma the way it sometimes does after car accidents or close calls. But at night, when I lay in the dark, I'd hear her voice again. Soft, low, threading through my dreams. You weren't in it before. I stopped sleeping. Coffee and gas station food carried me state to state, days blurring. In Oregon, I passed a sign on the side of the highway, white metal, spray-painted letters, "Wake up." My grip tightened on the wheel. I didn't slow down. In Montana, I pulled over at a rest stop just to breathe, to convince myself I was real. This was real. I splashed water on my face, stared at my reflection in the mirror over the sink, and for a split second, it wasn't me staring back. It was her. Black eyes. That too wide smile. I smashed the mirror with my fist and drove through the night, bleeding. It's been 2 weeks now. I'm in Nevada, though it doesn't matter anymore. The signs keep appearing, at gas stations, at intersections, reflected faintly in store windows when I walk by. Sometimes late at night, I catch myself humming the tune Danny used to hum in the van. I don't know when I learned it. Sometimes I dream I'm still on that road. Sometimes I wake at 3:07 a.m. with gravel under my nails. And sometimes when I glance at the passenger seat, I see her for just a moment, barefoot, smiling. I don't think I ever left. The first time I heard about the disappearances, it was over coffee in a small RV park outside Flagstaff, the kind of place where retirees and seasonal workers parked side by side, sharing stories around folding tables and portable fire pits. An old man named Frank, 72, wiry as fence wire, with sunburned skin and hands like twisted roots, leaned across the table and said it like he was sharing the weather forecast. You hear about the couple that vanished in their rig up north? At first, I thought it was just campfire rumor. You hear plenty of those when you live on the road. Ghost towns, Bigfoot sightings, old mines cursed by dead prospectors. But Frank wasn't joking. His eyes didn't flinch. He pulled a folded newspaper clipping from his vest pocket and slid it across the table. Terry and Diane Whitaker, it read. Mid-50s. Retired teachers from Colorado. Last seen near the Coconino National Forest 3 months ago. Their RV was found abandoned at a primitive campsite. Keys in the ignition, doors locked, no footprints leading away, no sign of forced entry, just empty. That's what hooked me. Not just the story, but the details. The way it all felt too ordinary to be sensational. They weren't thrill seekers or backwoods hermits. They were people like me, people who trusted the quiet promise of America's wilderness. And yet they'd vanished as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. I decided to dig. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was something darker, some strange compulsion born of long nights alone on the road. I started looking into similar cases, and that's when I realized Frank was only scratching the surface. These disappearances weren't just rumors, they were patterns. The more I looked, the more the pieces started lining up. RVs found abandoned with engines still warm, campsites left intact, coffee mugs still half full, no drag marks, no broken branches, no signs of wildlife attack, and always the same thing, deep, remote stretches of wilderness. No cell service, no witnesses. Places where the land itself felt older than language. I plotted them on a map one night, sitting alone in my RV while rain hammered the roof. The pins clustered in strange ways. The Olympic Peninsula in Washington, the high desert of Utah, the dense pine forests of northern Arizona, all national or state land, all places where, if you screamed, no one would hear you. The first one I decided to visit was a site off an old forest road outside Sedona, not far from where Terry and Diane had disappeared. I parked my RV in a pullout near the trailhead, miles from the nearest paved road. The silence out there hit differently. Not peaceful, not soothing, but heavy. You know that feeling when you turn off your engine after driving for hours and suddenly you realize how loud the absence of noise can be? That was the kind of quiet that pressed on your chest, made you swallow hard just to remind yourself you were still real. I hiked the path where their RV had been found. The site was ordinary, a flat patch of dirt shaded by ponderosa pines, a crude fire ring of blackened stones, empty beer bottles scattered in the brush. Nothing remarkable. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ranger who'd found the Whitakers' RV told investigators it looked like they'd just stepped out for a minute. Their chairs were still out, their awning still extended. A paperback book lay face down on the table, its pages bloated from rain. No signs of animals or people. It was as if they'd simply stood up, walked into the trees, and dissolved into the shadows. I spent that night camped near the same spot. I wanted to see what they'd seen, hear what they'd heard. At first, it was uneventful, just wind through the needles, the occasional snap of a branch as deer moved through. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that I still can't explain. It was faint, almost too quiet to notice at first. 3 slow knocks against metal. Rhythmic. Hollow. It sounded exactly like someone rapping their knuckles against my RV's rear bumper. I sat up instantly, my pulse exploding in my ears. I killed my lights. The world outside was pure black. I waited, listening, barely breathing. Then, 3 more knocks. Not on the bumper this time, on the side door. I grabbed the flashlight and flung the curtain back, shining it straight out the window. Nothing. No movement. No footprints in the dirt. I stayed up the rest of that night, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, telling myself it had to be the wind, maybe a loose branch tapping against the side of the rig. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. By dawn, I packed up and drove out fast. And yet the strangest thing wasn't what I'd heard. It was what I saw in my rearview mirror as I pulled away. For a split second, in the beam of my taillights, I swore I saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. Tall, motionless, pale in the dim light. And then it was gone. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road. That should have been enough to scare me off. But instead, it lit a fire in me, because I realized that whatever happened to those people, it wasn't random. It wasn't bad luck or bad navigation. It was something that lived in the cracks of those remote places, something that waited for you when you were most alone. And I needed to know more. So I started chasing the others. That's how I ended up in Utah, standing in the shadow of a sandstone arch in the middle of nowhere, staring at the empty shell of an RV left behind by a man named Joel Weaver. Joel had been 38, solo traveler, mechanical engineer. He'd posted a photo on social media just days before vanishing. His RV parked against a red rock backdrop, grinning with a beer in hand. That was the last anyone saw of him. Rangers found his RV a week later, untouched. The strangest part, his hiking boots were still by the door. I camped in that exact spot. It felt like stepping into someone else's unfinished sentence. That night, I heard it again. 3 knocks. This time, though, they weren't on my RV. They came from the canyon walls, echoing back, deep and deliberate. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but I didn't. Not yet. Because somewhere in that sound, beneath the fear, I swear I heard something else. My name. Whispered low, carried by the stone. I didn't move. I couldn't. The sound hung in the air like a taut wire ready to snap. My breath came shallow, and the desert night wrapped itself around me like a burial shroud. There were no other campers out here. No lights for miles. No cell signal. Just me, my RV, and the voice that had no right knowing my name. I flicked off my lantern and sat in darkness, listening. Every muscle in my body tensed as the silence deepened again. stretching out until even the faint hum of blood in my ears felt deafening. I told myself it was just an echo, a trick of acoustics bouncing through the canyon, but deep down, I knew what I'd heard. Then came the knocks again. 3, slow, deliberate. Not against my RV this time, not against rock. They were closer now, sharper, like someone knocking on thin metal. My storage bay? My pulse kicked into overdrive. I forced myself to look out through the thin slit of my window, scanning the shadows. That's when I saw it. A pale shape moving between the canyon walls, too tall, too smooth. It didn't walk, it seemed to slide, gliding soundlessly over uneven ground. The beam of my flashlight caught it for half a second. No face, no features. Just a form, white, stretched thin, almost translucent. The beam flickered, and it was gone. I slammed every lock on the RV door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely twist the latches. I backed away, my breath fogging in the cold air of my own rig, and pressed my ear to the silence. That's when I realized the desert had gone still. Not quiet, still. No wind, no night insects, no shifting gravel, just dead air as if the entire world was holding its breath with me. And then, soft and clear, "Come out." I swear to you it wasn't a voice through my ears. It was in my head, curling up from the base of my skull like a thought I didn't own. It sounded familiar, like my own voice, only hollow. I don't remember making the decision to start the engine, but suddenly I was gripping the wheel, foot slamming the pedal to the floor. My headlights carved twin tunnels through the dark, bouncing off the canyon walls as the engine roared. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't dare. I drove blind down that narrow washboard road, tires skidding on loose gravel, until finally the terrain leveled and a faint glow broke over the horizon, the glow of distant highway lights, civilization, safety, or something close enough to it. When I finally pulled over at a gas station 2 towns over, my hands were still trembling so badly I could barely turn the key to cut the engine. I stepped out into the fluorescent wash of the lot, legs weak, and noticed something on my RV's door. 3 fingerprints. Long, thin, smeared down the metal as if they'd melted into it. They weren't mine. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat under the buzzing lights of that gas station, staring at those faint smears until dawn turned the horizon pink. That should have been it. A sane person would have stopped. But instead, the fear twisted into something else, a grim curiosity I couldn't shake. Because with every case I visited, every campsite tied to another unsolved RV disappearance, I felt it closing in, like I wasn't just chasing these vanishings, they were pulling me toward them. And it wasn't just Utah or Arizona. There was the couple near Mount Hood in Oregon, their RV found with the heater running and both doors locked from the inside, their rings and wallets still inside. No signs of forced entry. There was the retired vet in northern Michigan, whose motorhome was discovered in a clearing, stove still lit, bed unmade, as if he'd gotten up in the night and simply stepped outside, never to return. I drove to each site. I stayed in each one. And every time, the pattern repeated. The silence first, then the knocks. Always 3, always closer than before. But the last one nearly broke me. It was in Washington, deep in Olympic National Park, where the trees grow so tall they blot out the sun and moss carpets the ground thick enough to swallow your boots. The disappearance there belonged to a man named Alan Reeves, 59, widower, full-timer. His RV was found parked neat in a small turnout, driver's seat empty, headlights still on. I camped there alone. The forest was dense in a way that felt suffocating. Even during daylight, the canopy strangled out the sky, and everything smelled of damp wood and decay. I built a fire early just to keep from feeling like I was underwater. By midnight, the fire was down to embers. That's when I heard it. Not knocks this time. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the RV. I gripped my flashlight, heart pounding so loud I swore it would give me away. The steps were heavy but uneven, dragging slightly, as if whoever or whatever was out there didn't quite remember how to walk. I raised the flashlight and aimed it through the window, praying I'd see nothing. Instead, I saw a face. Pale, sunken eyes, thin lips pulled too tight over yellowed teeth, The face of a man I recognized instantly from the missing person poster taped to my dashboard. Alan Reeves. He smiled. And then he whispered through the glass, "It's your turn." I stumbled backwards, slamming into the kitchenette counter so hard it rattled every dish in my RV. My flashlight fell from my grip, rolling across the floor and casting frantic, spinning beams that painted the interior in nauseating flashes of light and shadow. When I scrambled to grab it and whipped it back toward the window. No footprints, no smudge of breath on the glass, just the dense black of Olympic forest pressing in like an ocean I couldn't breathe in. I locked every deadbolt, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat with my back against the door, clutching the flashlight and a kitchen knife I didn't even remember pulling from the drawer. Hours bled together, the darkness thick and alive outside my thin walls, until 3 knocks. This time they came from the roof. I froze, staring upward, heart clawing at my ribs. The sound was sharp, metallic, vibrating down through the ceiling like nails tapping a coffin lid. Then silence, long enough to wonder if I'd imagined it, long enough for hope to flicker in my chest. And then, dragging, slow, scraping movements sliding from one end of the roof to the other. I snapped. Threw the flashlight beam upward, knowing it wouldn't matter. Then the RV rocked, just slightly, but enough that I felt it in my bones. A shift of weight. Someone or something was up there. I didn't think. I turned the ignition. My hands were slick with sweat, slipping on the key, but on the third twist, it roared to life. Headlights cut twin tunnels through the suffocating dark as I slammed the gas. Gravel sprayed out behind me. The weight on the roof slid. Another knock, this time over the driver's seat, right above my head. Then it was gone. The rocking stopped. I didn't slow down, not even when the trees thinned, not even when the winding dirt road spat me out onto asphalt that gleamed faintly under moonlight. I drove for hours, not daring to check the mirrors, not daring to pull over, not daring to look at the roof where I swore I could still hear echoes of those knocks inside my skull. By the time I reached a coastal town on the edge of the peninsula, dawn was breaking. I parked at an all-night diner, trembling, and climbed out on shaky legs. When I looked at the roof, I expected nothing. Maybe a dent. Maybe nothing at all. Just proof I was unraveling. Instead, I saw 3 impressions. Not footprints, not animal tracks. Impressions elongated, smooth, as if 3 impossibly long fingers had pressed down on the thin metal and left their mark. I leaned against my RV, staring up at them while the early sun warmed the sky, and felt something hollow open inside me. This wasn't coincidence anymore. These places, these disappearances, they weren't isolated. They were connected. And whatever lived in those wild places had followed me out. I didn't stop digging after that. I couldn't. Every file I read, every forum post about RVs abandoned in deep woods or deserts, every whispered ranger story shared over campfire beers, they all painted the same picture. People who camped alone, too far from help. People who ignored small things. Knocks they rationalized away, shadows they told themselves were tricks of the firelight, voices they swore were just dreams. And each one disappeared, leaving behind traces that mocked reason. One man vanished in Idaho, his RV locked, his dog inside, starving but alive. Another in Nevada, his rig discovered idling on a salt flat, headlights still on though his keys were gone. A woman in Arkansas, her camp chair overturned, her coffee still warm. Everywhere I went, I felt it closer. The knocks came sooner, the voices clearer. In Montana, I woke to see a pale face outside my window again, but this time it wasn't Alan Reeves. It was my own, staring back at me, smiling wrong. By then, I'd stopped telling myself this was just investigation. I wasn't just collecting facts, I was being pulled towards something I couldn't name. It all came to a head in Wyoming, deep in Bridger-Teton National Forest. The disappearance there was recent, just 6 months prior. A young couple, Ethan and Marissa, both 32, experienced campers. Their RV was found perched on a cliffside overlook with its doors locked, dinner plates still on the table. I parked in the same spot. The view was breathtaking in the way that feels predatory, jagged peaks cutting the horizon, wind screaming over open expanse. I stayed up late, engine off, lights dimmed, and then it came. Not a knock this time, but a sound like wind whistling through hollow bone, high and shrill, circling the RV like it was hunting. Then footsteps and a voice. This time not in my head, not muffled through glass. It came from just outside, low and urgent. Open the door. I froze, knife in hand, every nerve on fire. You don't have to fight it, it said. The handle twitched, and then without thinking I lunged forward and wrenched it open. Cold air blasted inside. Empty night. No one there. But in the darkness beyond I saw them, pale figures, dozens of them, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, and among them faces I recognized from every missing poster, every file I'd read. Terry and Diane, Joel Weaver, Alan Reeves, Ethan and Marissa. All smiling, all beckoning. My hand trembled on the doorframe. For a second, I almost stepped out. Almost. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe it was instinct, maybe sheer animal terror, but I slammed the door shut so hard it rattled in its frame and locked it twice over. My breath came in harsh bursts, fogging the glass as I stumbled backward. Outside, they didn't move. They just stood there. The pale shapes in the dark lined up at the edge of my headlights. Some were barefoot, some in torn clothes, some with nothing but shadows draped across their shoulders. Their smiles never faltered. Not warm smiles, wrong ones. Wide, unblinking, stretched too far like they'd forgotten how to be human. The wind cut across the cliffside, screaming between the peaks, but they stood still as statues. Then one of them, a man in a faded red flannel, stepped forward. I recognized him instantly. It was the face from that dog case in Idaho, the one whose name I'd traced through every forum, thread, and ranger interview I could find. Tom Grayson, gone 2 years, presumed dead. He spoke, his voice clear over the wind. "It's better if you come now." I gripped the knife tighter. "What do you want?" I shouted through the glass, my voice breaking, sounding small even to my own ears. The figures didn't answer. They just tilted their heads in eerie unison, like they were listening to something else entirely. And then, all at once, the lights on my dashboard flickered. My RV's engine sputtered and died. Total darkness swallowed everything except the pale ring of their forms, glowing faintly in the night. That was when they moved. Not fast, slow, measured, like they had all the time in the world. Their feet didn't seem to disturb the gravel, didn't leave prints in the frost. I scrambled into the driver's seat, twisting the ignition, slamming my palm against it like I could will the engine alive. Nothing. Knock. From the rear. Knock. On the passenger side window. Knock. Right above my head on the roof. The knife nearly slipped from my grip, slick with sweat. My pulse roared like an engine caught in a runaway gear. The voice came again, closer this time, threading through my skull. "You've been chasing us long enough. Now it's your turn." I don't know what happened next. Maybe I blacked out for a second. Maybe something primal took over. But suddenly I was slamming both fists on the horn, the blaring sound tearing through the silence like a gunshot. My headlights surged back on. The engine roared to life beneath me like it had never died. I didn't hesitate. Foot down. Gravel sprayed in every direction as I shot forward, barreling past them, through them. And for a split second, I swear they weren't solid. My headlights passed right through those pale forms like fog catching light. I didn't look back. Not once. I drove until dawn, until my tank was nearly dry and my eyes ached from staring at the horizon. By the time I pulled into a crowded roadside truck stop, the sun had risen high enough to paint everything in warm, ordinary light. I sat there for an hour before I even moved, staring at the steering wheel, shaking so badly I could barely breathe. But here's the thing. When I finally climbed out, when I finally found the courage to walk around to the back of my RV, I saw something scrawled in the dirt coating the rear window. 3 words, written in long, finger-thin streaks. "Next time, stay." I stood there, reading it over and over, the letters trembling in the breeze, until a long-haul trucker brushed past me and asked if I was okay. I didn't answer, because I knew it wasn't over. It's not over now. I still hear them some nights. The knocks, the dragging on the roof, the faint, hollow voice threading through my dreams like smoke. I've stopped parking in remote places. I stick close to highways now, near towns, near people. I tell myself that's enough. But last week, in a crowded RV park outside Denver, I woke at 3 a.m. to silence. Not quiet, silence. And then 3 soft knocks on my door. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening. And then I heard it. It's time. I know one day I'll answer. Not because I want to, but because deep down, I think I already have. I had been driving the Maine coast for nearly 3 weeks, my old Volkswagen van hugging the shoreline roads like it had been built for them. There's a rhythm to that part of the country. Salt air rolling inland, gulls cutting against pale skies, the hiss of tide pulling across shale. And it worked on me in ways I didn't expect. I wasn't running from anything specific, but there was a restlessness in me I couldn't quiet. At night, parked in lonely campgrounds with the wind slapping against the canvas pop-top, I'd lie awake and wonder if solitude was sharpening my senses or if it was wearing them thin. It was just north of Cutler when I first saw it. A lighthouse, perched high on a jagged cliff. I almost missed it. Fog was hugging the coast so tight it felt like driving through a lung. But when the mist thinned for just a moment, there it was. Tall, whitewashed, weathered, but intact. A black lantern room capped it, dark against the pale sky. The strange part wasn't that I'd seen a lighthouse, Maine's full of them, but that I couldn't remember one ever being there. I'd driven this stretch last summer. I'd even camped near Cutler, eating lobster rolls on the tailgate, staring out at the sea. That lighthouse hadn't been there. I was sure of it. I pulled off on a turnout, killed the engine, and just stared. It was set back from the cliff edge, but had no visible road, no keeper's house, nothing but rock and pine around it. Out of instinct, I checked my phone. Signal was faint, but enough to load a map. No marker. I zoomed in closer. Nothing. No access road, no trailhead. The coastline between Cutler and McKeesport was empty. I laughed under my breath, but there was no humor in it. Maybe I'd missed a turnoff somewhere. Maybe it was abandoned, decommissioned, too obscure to bother marking. I decided I'd camp nearby, just for the night. The turnout wasn't level enough, so I rolled another 2 miles down the road to a patch of gravel cut back into the woods. It felt secluded, shielded from the sea by a band of evergreens, but I could still smell salt through the vents. When darkness fell, the fog swallowed everything. I made dinner by lantern light, the van's walls creaking slightly as the temperature dropped. The silence out there was strange, not empty. That's when I saw the first light. It started as a faint glow through the fog, so dim I thought it was a distant boat. But no, it was higher and steady, and it grew brighter by the second. I walked around the van, squinting through the mist, and there it was, the lighthouse. Lit, the lantern room blazing against the fog like a beacon. I froze. Who lit it? No road, no house, no sign of anyone. I should have felt reassured. Lighthouses exist to warn, to protect, but instead, my chest tightened. The glow didn't rotate. It just burned, steady and unnatural, until the fog turned a ghostly white around it. I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe there was an access road I couldn't see in the dark. Maybe I was overthinking it. I climbed into the van, locked up tight, and forced myself to sleep. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the skylight, and something was wrong. The van was level, perfectly level. I sat up fast. My camp spot had been on uneven ground. I'd parked with the front tires tipped slightly down toward the road. But now I was sitting flat. My stomach turned cold. I threw open the side door. The forest looked the same, but when I stepped out, crunching over pine needles, my gut dropped. The turnout was gone. The gravel shoulder, the road, gone. My van was sitting in a clearing. Fresh, damp soil, no tire tracks leading in or out. Through the trees, I could hear surf. Closer than before, I spun in a slow circle, nothing but pines and shadow. The air smelled sharper here, brine and rot threaded together. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the gull cries overhead. I stumbled back to the van, slammed the door shut, and just sat there, gripping the wheel. I didn't move for almost an hour. When I finally worked up the nerve to start the engine, I aimed straight through the trees. Branches scraped the paint, sap streaking the glass, but I kept going until, mercifully, the VW broke through onto asphalt. The same coastal highway. I was shaking. I drove fast, too fast, southbound, back toward Cutler, back toward anything familiar. But no matter how far I drove, the fog clung to me. Every few miles, I glanced left at the coastline, and there it was, the lighthouse, always closer than it should have been. By dusk, I was exhausted. I pulled into a state campground, an actual one this time, paid cash to a ranger who didn't even glance at me twice. I parked, plugged in, and told myself I'd leave Maine tomorrow. Maybe head inland. Get away from the coast. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fog rolled in thick and silent, swallowing the camp's fire pits and picnic tables. I kept checking the window screens, half expecting to see that glow between the trees. Midnight came and went. Nothing. Maybe I'd imagined it. Then at 3 a.m., the light hit the side of my van. It wasn't headlights. It wasn't fire. It was cold, steady, and bright enough to etch my shadow across the opposite wall. My breath hitched. I crawled to the front seat and peered out. Through the fog, past the pines, high above the sea. The lighthouse was lit, closer than ever. And I swear I heard the faintest sound under the hum of the wind, like the slow, dragging crash of waves. But the campground was 5 miles inland. I sat there, frozen, one hand on the steering wheel, the other trembling against the glass. The beam from that lighthouse, it wasn't a beam at all. It wasn't sweeping across the horizon the way a normal one should. It was fixed, dead center, and it was pointing straight at me. I ducked out of instinct, heart pounding so hard it felt like it rattled my teeth. I told myself not to look again, not to feed whatever this was with my attention. But I couldn't help it. I eased my head up slowly, just enough to peek out over the dashboard. The light hadn't moved. And neither had I. It should have been impossible to see it from here. I'd studied the maps after the first night, traced every inch of coastline near Cutler. There was nothing. No inlet, no hidden island. But the way that glow sliced through the fog and bled across my windshield felt undeniable. Like it wasn't out there. It was in here, somehow folding in around me. The wind picked up then, sharp and wet, smelling like sea spray, even though there was no water anywhere this campground. I could taste salt on my lips, and that's when the sound started again. Low, rhythmic, steady. Not just the crash of waves, something deeper, more deliberate. Like breath. Inhale, exhale. I snapped the curtains shut and backed away from the front seats until my shoulders hit the sliding door. I gripped the edge of the counter just to steady myself. My thoughts raced. Drive out now, leave, just go. But I couldn't shake the terror that if I stepped outside, I'd see it even closer. That if I opened the van door, I'd hear the ocean roaring right there in front of me, even in the middle of the woods. Minutes dragged. Maybe hours. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those curtains, afraid to blink. Eventually, exhaustion took me. My eyelids got heavy. I slid down onto the floor, knees hugged tight to my chest, and the darkness folded over me. When I woke again, sunlight filtered weakly through the skylight. I felt a jolt of relief, like morning had broken whatever hold that place had on me. Until I opened the door. The smell hit me first, thick, salt-heavy air that clung to my throat and made me cough. Then I heard it, the ocean, close enough it drowned out everything else. I stepped outside, barefoot, and froze. The campground was gone. The trees had thinned out into a rocky bluff like gulls wheeling overhead. Below me, the sea churned dark and violent against jagged stone. And there, looming higher than ever, its base half lost to mist, was the lighthouse. The morning sun caught its whitewashed sides, and for a moment I swore it leaned ever so slightly toward me, like it had been waiting. I stumbled backward into the van and slammed the door shut, panic clawing up my spine. I twisted the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. I cursed, hit the wheel, tried again. Dead. That's when I saw the footprints. They were in the dirt just outside the passenger door. Bare feet. Human. Leading away from the van toward the cliff's edge, toward the lighthouse. I hadn't walked there. I knew I hadn't, but there they were, damp, dark impressions in the soil trailing off into the mist. I don't remember deciding to move, but my hand was on the door handle before I knew it. Some part of me was screaming, "Stay inside," but something else, deeper, hungrier, pushed me forward. I stepped out. The air felt colder, sharper. My feet slid slightly on the wet ground as I followed those prints, each one leading me closer to the roar of the sea. The closer I got, the stranger the sound became. It wasn't just waves anymore. There was a cadence in it, a pattern like syllables drawn out over water, guttural and low, almost like a voice. I strained to listen and thought I heard my name in it, stretched long and slow. The mist parted briefly then, and I saw it up close for the first time. The lighthouse towered above, its stones damp and mottled with sea growth, as if it had risen straight from the ocean floor. The lantern room glimmered faintly even in daylight, pulsing, not steady anymore, but rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I should have run. Every rational part of me screamed it. But instead, I stepped closer. The ground tilted slightly beneath me, as though the earth itself sloped toward the cliff. The footprints ended just a few feet ahead, right where the fog thickened again. I hesitated there, shaking, and that's when I heard it, clearer this time. A voice, carried on the wind. It didn't just sound like my name, it was my name. I turned to run back to the van, but the fog closed in fast, swallowing the VW whole. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, like it had been erased. And all I could see now was the lighthouse. I stood rooted to the spot, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The fog pressed around me like wet cotton, muffling everything but that slow, rhythmic crash of waves. And the voice. It was clearer now, threading itself through the wind. It didn't sound angry or threatening. It sounded patient, like it had been calling for a long time, waiting for me to finally hear it. I stumbled forward, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, that I should turn back. But my feet felt heavy, as if the ground itself tilted toward the cliff and dragged me with it. The closer I came, the louder the ocean became, until it wasn't just sound anymore. It was vibration, thrumming deep in my chest, shaking my ribs. The lighthouse loomed overhead, impossibly tall now, its surface slick with spray. I craned my neck back and saw the lantern room pulsing faintly, each glow syncing with the pounding in my skull. My hands trembled at my sides, fingertips numb. I realized I was barefoot. When had I lost my boots? I didn't remember taking them off, but my soles felt raw, scraped by the rough ground. "Hello?" My voice cracked, ragged and thin against the roar of the sea. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't alone, that this was real and not some hallucination born of isolation and bad sleep. But when the wind shifted and the reply came, I felt my knees nearly buckle. It was my own voice that answered, a perfect echo, only it didn't repeat what I'd said. It spoke back. "Come closer." The fog churned violently, curling upward like smoke, and for a second I swore I saw shapes within it, elongated shadows that didn't belong to anything solid. One of them seemed to lean toward me, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt its smile. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. I staggered backward, forcing myself to look away from the lighthouse, scanning for any sign of my van. Nothing. No road, no woods, just stone and fog and the endless crash of black water below. My heart raced, and I thought, this isn't happening. I'm dreaming. I'm still asleep in the van. I pinched my arm hard enough to leave a mark. The pain was sharp, real. Something changed in the air then. The voice stopped. The waves grew distant, muted, as if someone had stuffed the world with cotton. All I could hear was my own breathing. I glanced up and realized the lantern room was no longer glowing. Instead, it was open. There was no glass in the window frames, no barrier at all. Inside, I could see the spiral staircase winding upwards, slick with moisture. My pulse hammered. I knew in the marrow of my bones that if I climbed those stairs, I wouldn't come back down. But something else tugged at me, a memory I couldn't quite place. A beach from my childhood, my father's hand gripping mine as we walked the tide line, waves licking our ankles, his voice telling me not to fear the sea, that it never really wanted to hurt anyone. that it only called back those who belonged to it. I blinked hard. My father had died when I was 8. He'd drowned off the coast of Rockport. They never found his body. And now, faint and low, I heard his voice behind me. Ely, it whispered. My name, soft as breath, the way he used to say it when waking me up for school. I turned slowly. Through the fog, I saw a figure, broad-shouldered, familiar, barefoot, dripping seawater, his clothes clinging like he just stepped from the surf. His face was hidden in shadow, but I didn't need to see it. I knew it was him. Dad? My voice cracked. He lifted a hand and beckoned me forward. Behind him, the fog thinned just enough to show a narrow path leading down the cliffside toward the churning sea. And there, far below, half obscured by spray, I saw the jagged rocks and a dark opening in the cliff wall. A hollow. Devil's Hollow. The name hit me out of nowhere, as though I'd always known it but had just forgotten. I stepped forward once, then again my bare feet scraping stone. The air smelled briny, sharp. My father, if that's what it was, kept moving, descending the path with sure steps that left no prints behind. The lighthouse pulsed faintly behind me, as if urging me to turn back, but I didn't. I couldn't. Every muscle in my body screamed to follow him. By the time I reached the midpoint of the cliff, the sound of the waves had swallowed everything else. My father stopped at the mouth of the hollow. It yawned black and wet, slick with moss, the tide licking its edges. He turned toward me and finally smiled. It wasn't his smile. My heart stopped cold. Its mouth stretched too wide, far past what was human, teeth glinting like wet stone. Its eyes were dark pits, blacker than the hollow behind it. I stumbled backward, my heels slipping on damp rock, nearly pitching me off the path. The thing lunged. I bolted upward, clawing my way back toward the cliff top, my lungs burning. Behind me, I heard something slam against the rocks, wet and heavy, followed by a guttural sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a laugh. I didn't stop until I reached the lighthouse again, panting, hands raw from grabbing stone. Its door stood open now, the stairway yawning upward like a throat. The fog closed in tight around me, cutting off everything else. And from somewhere deep inside the lantern room above, I heard my name whispered again. Only this time, it wasn't my father's voice. It was mine. I gasped awake so violently I cracked my head against the low ceiling of my VW's pop-top. Air tore into my lungs like I'd been drowning for hours. I sat there for a second, hunched and shaking, sweat soaking my shirt. The van was quiet. Too quiet. Sunlight filtered in through the curtains, pale and washed out, but it wasn't the warm gold of morning. It was flat, dull, colorless, like someone had dimmed the world just enough to unsettle it. My heart hammered as I forced myself to look around. The van was exactly as I'd left it. Stove, counter, cooler, everything in place. No water, no fog. For one fleeting moment, I thought it was over. I opened the sliding door. The ocean hit me like a slap. It was close, closer than I'd ever heard it, its roar filling every inch of air. The smell of salt was so heavy it stung my nostrils. I stepped out barefoot into damp gravel, my breath catching. I was parked on a bluff. My van sat perfectly level at the cliff's edge, its tires inches from the drop. Below, black water churned against the rocks. And there it was, the lighthouse, closer than ever. Its white stone gleamed in the pale light, but the windows were empty. No glass, no lens, nothing inside but darkness. And yet, even in daylight, its lantern room glowed faintly, pulsing slow and steady, like a heartbeat I could feel through my shoes. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My van's engine, dead. I tried the ignition over and over, but it was nothing but silence. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. I climbed out again, scanning wildly for any road, any sign of escape, but there was none. No woods, no highway, just the bluff, the van, the lighthouse, and the endless gray sea beyond. I spun in a full circle, panic clawing its way up my throat. Then I saw it. Footprints. Fresh, dark, pressed deep into the wet gravel. Leading from my van toward the cliff's edge, bare feet. Mine. I stared down at them, my stomach twisting, and realized my soles were still damp. Not from dew, from salt water. I backed away, hands trembling. My mind screamed, "This isn't real. This isn't real, but the cold air bit my skin and my lungs burned, and every sensation told me otherwise. I turned to the van, desperate for some kind of anchor, something solid, and froze. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. I knew instantly it was me, not just a reflection, not a trick of glass, me. Same clothes, same tired, hollow-eyed face. It turned its head toward me, perfectly synchronized, and smiled, that same impossible smile I'd seen in the water. I staggered back so fast I almost went over the cliff. The wind howled suddenly, a violent whipping sound that carried with it a whisper, low, guttural, almost human. I couldn't make out words at first, but then, clear as day, it came. You never left. The van door slid open with a slow groan. My double stepped out barefoot, dripping seawater that hissed against the cold gravel. It moved in perfect silence, that awful grin fixed in place, and I realized then that there was no way to run. There was nowhere to go. I bolted anyway, straight toward the bluff. My breath tore at my throat, legs screaming as I sprinted, and behind me I heard it follow, bare feet slapping wet ground. The sound was wrong, too fast, too close. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I reached the edge, skidded to a halt just short of the drop, and stared down into the churning black water. It called to me. Not with words, not even with sound, just a feeling, a deep, primal pull in my chest, urging me forward. The roar of the ocean rose higher, deafening, and I felt it vibrate through my bones. The lighthouse pulsed brighter, brighter still, until my vision blurred with white. Hands clamped around my shoulders. I whipped around. It was me, face to face, eyes black as the hollow, grinning wide enough to split skin, its fingers dug in deep, ice cold and unyielding. "Come home," it whispered, and I couldn't tell if it was my voice or his or the sea itself. The ground vanished beneath my feet. I woke to silence. This time it was real silence. No waves, no wind. Just the soft hum of my van's fridge and the faint smell of coffee grounds from the night before. I sat upright, gasping, staring around. I was back in my original campsite, the one off the highway near Cutler. Pine trees, gravel turnout, the road right there, my boots neatly by the door. For a long time, I didn't move. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. No signal, but it showed the date. 3 days had passed. I staggered outside into the morning light. The forest was quiet, ordinary, almost painfully so. No ocean, no lighthouse, just stillness and birdsong. I told myself it had to be a dream, a bad one, vivid and lingering. But when I looked down, I saw footprints in the dirt, bare feet leading away from the van, straight toward the trees. I left Maine that day, drove without stopping until I crossed into New Hampshire. I haven't gone back, and I don't camp near the coast anymore. Not after that. But some nights, when the wind's just right and the air smells faintly of salt, I swear I can hear the ocean again, roaring in the distance. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see it, a pale glow pulsing faintly against the fog, waiting. They say Alaska doesn't take you, it waits for you to take yourself. But out there, past the safe border towns and the glossy trail brochures, there's a silence so deep it feels like something is listening. Not watching, listening. And once it knows your voice, it doesn't forget you. I didn't believe any of that when I first crossed into talk with the RV rattling behind me, my partner Mallory sleeping in the back, and 3 weeks of supplies packed in like we were invading, not vacationing. I was 39, she was 35. We'd been together 9 years, worked remote most of the year, and we'd finally saved up enough time and courage to do Alaska the right way. No tour guides, no hookups, no safe little strips of gravel. Just the road and whatever dared to cross it. Mallory had been dreaming of Denali since her college days. She had this old, creased National Geographic spread on her desk of a snowy ridgeline blanketed in mist with the caption, "The Final Frontier." And I had my dream too. Something quieter. I wanted to see stars that didn't have names yet. I wanted cold so clean it made your lungs burn. I wanted proof that Earth still had teeth. The first few days were exactly what we needed, rugged but rewarding. We took the Talk Cutoff west, then split down some unmarked back route recommended by a guy we met at a gas station. Said it was real Alaska, none of that polished park ranger stuff. His name was Clyde, probably mid-60s, deep lines in his face like roots in frost. He warned us, "Don't trust what looks solid out here. Up here, the land remembers who walks on it." I thought he meant the permafrost, but I was wrong. That shortcut was beautiful for a while. Trees like cathedrals, and the silence between them felt almost reverent. We passed creeks that shimmered like silver veins, gravel switchbacks sharp enough to make you sit forward and pray the brakes meant it. The deeper we got, the more the GPS failed. Eventually, it just stopped updating altogether. We didn't panic. That was the point, right? Get off grid. Breathe without cell towers in your ribs. We still had a physical topographic map, food, water, tools, and fuel, everything we needed, or so we thought. It started with the road. Not all at once, but in pieces. First, the gravel turned to mud, but it hadn't rained. Not even dew. Just wet. Like the earth had been sweating under the surface, and now it couldn't hold it in anymore. We slowed down, checked the tires, kept moving. Then came the soft spots. Mallory noticed them first, areas where the wheels would sink just slightly, and the engine would grunt like it was pulling through something heavier than dirt. It was like driving across a blanket that slowly swallowed your feet. We stopped near a bend in the road that curled around a thick alder thicket. I climbed out, boots sinking half an inch before I even moved. When I looked down, the ground shimmered, like oil under the surface, except it wasn't oil. It was water. Thin, moving, and cold. Mallory opened the passenger door and said, "Do you hear that?" I turned my head. There was no wind, no animals, no sound at all. She said, "It's too quiet." That's when I realized I hadn't heard a bird in over an hour. Not a single branch snap, no buzzing flies, no rustling leaves, just the RV cooling in the air and our breath, the kind of silence that doesn't let you feel alone. We debated turning around, but we couldn't remember a clear spot wide enough to make a full U-turn without risking the whole rig, and we hadn't passed another soul in 6 hours. So we pressed forward, slower now. Tiredness crept in behind the wheel like it had weight, like it was pushing down on my spine. Later that night, we made camp on a slightly elevated patch off the road, surrounded by tamarack trees and the remnants of an old logging track. It looked dry enough, solid. No sink, no shimmer. We cooked by headlamp, soup and freeze-dried beans, trying to keep the mood light. Mallory poured whiskey into tin mugs and told me stories about her grandpa surviving an avalanche in British Columbia. The fire flickered strange, though. I didn't want to say anything. Maybe it was the wind, but it kept pulling sideways like something was breathing to the left of us, just out of frame. She asked me what I was thinking, and I lied. I said I was just tired, that the silence was nice for once. I didn't tell her that I felt like we were being weighed, measured, not in a spiritual way, not by God or nature, but by the terrain itself. That night, around 2 a.m., I heard it. A pop. Then a long, low groan. Not mechanical. Not tree branch or animal. It was the earth. Something shifted beneath us, a kind of cracking that echoed into itself like a jaw unhinging. I sat up in the RV and felt the rig tilt. Not much. Maybe an inch, maybe 2. But it was enough to make the cupboard door swing open and the spoon drawer rattle. I got out with a flashlight and stepped onto ground that looked the same, but felt different, softer, thinner, like the outer layer of skin on something alive. I crouched and pressed my hand into the dirt. It sank fast, halfway to the wrist, and came back slick with something cold and gray. Mallory joined me, barefoot and shivering in a hoodie. She whispered, "Do you feel that? It's like breathing." And she wasn't wrong. The earth had a rhythm to it. Like something underneath was flexing, not upward, but inward, drawing in. I wanted to pack up right then. I wanted to get behind the wheel and gun it in reverse until we hit gravel and gas fumes. But there was no telling where the soft spots ended. No guarantee we wouldn't drive straight into something deeper. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt motion. Not dreams, motion. Like the RV was gliding forward an inch at a time, without the engine running. I kept checking 4 times. We hadn't moved, but the feeling wouldn't go away. By morning, we were stuck. Not sunk, not yet, but we couldn't roll forward. Tires spun and sprayed wet dirt. Reverse was worse. The ground peeled open in layers, soft and viscous, and then came the smell, like rotted snow or mildew trapped under canvas. Not strong, just present, thin and creeping, enough to make you feel like something was decomposing underneath you, but not dead yet. Mallory stayed calm. She always did. She said we should ration fuel, check the map, and maybe hike out to higher ground to call for help. But I noticed she hadn't eaten. Her hands were shaking, and when I asked her what was wrong, she just stared into the trees and said, "I think something followed us here." I froze when she said it, one boot planted in the softening dirt, the other still pressed on the RV's steel step. Her voice didn't tremble the way you'd expect from someone spooked. It was quiet, measured, like she'd been thinking it for a while and finally couldn't keep it in. "What do you mean? Followed us?" I asked, scanning the tree line. My flashlight beam cut through branches like shards of glass, sharp and fractured. Nothing moved. Mallory didn't answer at first. She just pointed past the tamaracks, deeper into the line of shadow where the ground dropped slightly downhill. I squinted, but there was nothing. Just dark woods and mist threading low to the ground like smoke. "I heard it last night," she said finally. "When you went out to check the ground, something walking, slow, heavy, stopping when I moved." I wanted to tell her it was probably a moose, maybe even a bear. Alaska had plenty of them, but the words stuck like splinters in my throat. Because I'd been out there, and I hadn't heard a single footfall but my own. We spent the morning trying to free the RV. I laid traction pads under the rear tires while Mallory shifted between drive and reverse. Each time the wheels spun, the earth spat out sludge, pale, clay-colored muck that didn't smell like mud. It smelled metallic, like blood in water. Worse, the pads sank half an inch every time she accelerated. It was like the land was pulling them down. By noon, we gave up. The RV was holding steady but unmoving, nose tilted slightly forward like it was leaning into whatever had caught it. I suggested hiking. We still had daylight and plenty of water. If we could climb high enough to get a signal, we could call for recovery. But even as I spoke, I saw Mallory looking at the trees again. That hollow stare. "Do you feel like," she began, and then trailed off. "What?" I pressed. "Like the road's gone?" I unfolded the map and traced our route with my finger. We weren't far from the marked highway, at least not in miles. 6, maybe 7. But the map meant nothing if the ground didn't match it anymore. When I looked back the way we'd come, the ruts from our tires blurred into flat earth. No track. No sign we'd ever arrived. We loaded our packs anyway, essentials only. Water, food bars, the sat phone that wouldn't connect, a flare gun. I locked the RV even though it felt ridiculous, then glanced back at it one last time. It looked smaller somehow, like it was settling. Like, if we left it too long, it might just vanish into the dirt. We followed what looked like an incline through the trees, angling toward higher ground. The air got colder. Not sharp, just damp, the kind that clings to your clothes. I could smell pine at first, but after an hour, even that was gone. It was replaced by that same faint rot. Mallory stopped talking altogether, her jaw set tight. The silence between us got heavy. 2 hours in, I started hearing it too. Not footsteps, not branches snapping, just a second rhythm under ours. When we stopped, it stopped. When we walked, it matched our pace, just far enough to keep its distance, but close enough to never let the sound fade. Once, I turned fast enough to catch something. Not movement, just a shape. Between two trunks, maybe 30 yards back, there was a darker patch of dark, like a hole punched through the trees, too tall to be a stump, too still to be an animal. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Mallory didn't even turn. "Don't," she said. I wanted to argue, but her tone froze me. I faced forward again and kept walking. We reached a ridge around sunset, or what I thought was sunset. The sky had that bruised color, purple fading to black, but it was hard to tell where the horizon even was. Below us stretched miles of forest, broken only by narrow cuts of water glinting faintly like scars. No towns, no cabins, no roads. We sat down on the rocks, exhausted. I pulled out the sat phone, raised it high. Nothing, not even a flicker of signal. That's when I noticed the ground again. The rock we'd climbed onto, granite, hard, steady, wasn't right. I pressed my palm to it, expecting cold. Instead, it felt damp, almost soft in spots, as if there were something porous beneath the thin crust. I knocked on it with my knuckles. Hollow. Mallory shifted closer to me. "I think we're standing on it," she said quietly. "On what?" She looked at me like I should already know. "The same thing that's under the RV." I wanted to laugh it off, tell her it was just thin ground over a cavern or permafrost. But then I heard it. Faint, from below us this time. Not behind. A wet, dragging sound, like soil sliding over itself, deeper than any animal could dig. We climbed down fast, abandoning the ridge before full dark. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. That hollow sound wouldn't leave my ears. The thought of sleeping on it made my stomach turn. Back at camp, if you could still call it that, the RV was different. It was tilted further. Nose down, front wheels submerged halfway in muck I swear hadn't been there when we left. The driver's side door was smeared with streaks of gray soil as if something had brushed or pressed against it. No footprints, no claw marks, just contact. Mallory didn't go near it. She stood about 10 feet away, arms crossed tight, eyes glassy in the beam of my flashlight. "It wants us to stay," she said. I didn't know if she was talking about the ground or whatever had followed us from the trees. I didn't sleep that night either, not even close. The earth groaned every hour or so, like it was exhaling. And sometimes, between those groans, I'd hear the faint crunch of movement outside. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady, like patience given shape. Around 3 a.m., Mallory sat up suddenly. Her face was pale, eyes locked on the window. "It's closer," she whispered. I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing, just trees and fog. Then, about 20 feet out, 2 faint glimmers reflected back at us. Not animal eyes, too far apart, too steady, and too high. I killed the interior light and grabbed her hand. Those glimmers didn't blink, they didn't sway. They just waited. We sat frozen in the dark, the only sound our breathing, shallow and ragged. The RV felt smaller than it ever had before. Walls closing in, the silence outside louder than any storm I'd ever camped through. I tightened my grip on Mallory's hand and watched those 2 glimmers in the fog. They didn't move, not forward, not back, just fixed on us, unwavering, as if they knew we had nowhere else to go. Minutes dragged into an hour. The fog thickened, wrapping around the RV like wet wool. Every now and then I swore I heard something brush against the siding, soft, almost polite, like fingers running along sheet metal. Mallory buried her face against my shoulder. "I can't," she whispered, trembling. "I can't be in here anymore." I wanted to tell her to stay put, to lock every door and keep the curtains drawn, but the words died in my mouth. Because she was right. The air inside had gone sour, heavy, damp. It wasn't just fear, it was like the ground smell had seeped in, soaking our clothes, our skin. That faint rot was everywhere now, pressing in with every breath. And then, sudden, a sound like suction, deep and wet, from beneath the RV. We both lurched to our feet, staring at the floor. Another sound came, louder this time, a slow, dragging pull, as though something beneath us was shifting upward, dragging mud with it. The whole rig tilted forward another inch with a creak that set my teeth on edge. "Go," I hissed, grabbing the emergency pack. "Now." We bolted out into the freezing mist, boots sinking immediately into soft earth that clung like glue. The smell out there was worse, almost metallic now, thick enough to taste. We staggered back several yards, hearts pounding, and turned to face the RV. It looked wrong. Listing forward so far, it seemed to strain on its rear axle bat like it was being swallowed slowly, inch by inch. One front tire was already gone, sunken completely into gray muck. The fog swirled low to the ground around it, shifting in unnatural curls like breath rising from unseen lungs. And then Mallory grabbed my arm, fingernails digging deep. "It's behind us," she said. I spun. The glimmers, those 2 reflective pinpoints, were closer now. Much closer. 10 feet, maybe less. My flashlight beam cut across them, but there was no shape, no figure, just those lights, suspended midair like eyes that belonged to nothing. I raised the flare gun, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I fired. The flare arced upward, burning hot and red, splashing light across the clearing. For a second, one terrible, gut-turning second, I saw it. Tall. Too tall. A silhouette stretched thin like it had been pulled up from the ground instead of born standing. Its head tilted unnaturally sideways, limbs long and jointed wrong, like branches bent by wind, and where its face should have been, there was only darkness. A hollow, and that smell rolled stronger. Mallory screamed. It didn't move. Not forward, not back, just watching. Waiting. We ran. We didn't think. We didn't plan. Packs slamming against our backs, boots tearing through mud that clutched like hands, we bolted blind into the trees, away from the RV, away from that thing. Branches clawed at our faces, ripped at our clothes. The ground beneath us squelched and hissed like every step punched holes in some vast wet lung below. I didn't look back. Not once. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving. The trees blurred, the fog thinned, and somewhere ahead I saw a faint incline, a slope that climbed toward darker rock. We scrambled upward, slipping, clawing at roots. The sound of dragging mud followed us, slow, steady, patient, but always close enough to hear. It wasn't chasing. Not really. It was following, just fast enough to keep pace. We didn't stop until we collapsed on a rocky shelf, gasping, knees torn raw. I whipped the flashlight behind us. Nothing. Just fog and black woods. Mallory sobbed silently, her breath coming out in clouds. I wrapped an arm around her and scanned every shadow, every hollow between the trees, and then, below us, I heard it. A hollow crack. Loud this time. The kind of sound that made your stomach drop. I leaned forward and saw the clearing where we'd left the RV, or what was left of it. It was gone. No shape, no glint of metal, just wet earth, yawning open like a sinkhole, mud heaving inward in slow, steady waves until it sealed itself shut again. Mallory's nails dug into my sleeve. She was whispering something over and over, words I couldn't catch, too soft and trembling. I turned to her, pulled her close, and then I realized what she was saying. It's not done. Her words hit me like a gut punch. It's not done. It wasn't enough that the RV was gone. The earth itself seemed alive, like it had only swallowed the first bite. And we were still here, perched on rock that might not hold, lungs burning in the thin, cold air, hearts pounding against the dark. I didn't know where to go. The map was useless. The sat phone was dead weight. All that was left was instinct, the kind that screamed at you in a voice older than language. Move. Higher ground. Don't stop. We stumbled upward, clinging to rock slick with condensation. My thighs burned, my boots slipped, and each time my foot struck stone, I half expected it to echo hollow again, like the ridge had. But this felt different, solid, jagged, real. Behind us, though, came that sound, the wet pull of earth shifting, distant but steady. The forest below seemed to breathe with it. Why isn't it faster? Mallory rasped beside me, clutching my arm. What? I panted. If it wanted us, she said, glancing back toward the fog-shrouded woods, it could just... Don't. I cut her off. Not because I had an answer, but because saying it out loud made it worse. Whatever it wasn't hunting us like prey. It wasn't rushing. It was hurting. We climbed for hours. My body went numb in places, hands raw from gripping jagged stone, ankles screaming each time we slipped. The fog thinned as we rose, but the silence stayed. No birds. No wind. Even the sound of our breath seemed swallowed as soon as it left our mouths. By dawn, if it was even dawn, we crested another ridge. The view hit me like a blow. Endless forest sprawling below, unbroken and gray, glistening faintly as if dew coated every inch of it. No towns, no lights, no sign of human life. And far, far below, in the mist, a ripple. I blinked. It wasn't the wind. It was like watching water move under a skin of dirt. A slow undulation that stretched for what had to be miles. A wave under the ground. Mallory saw it too. She clutched my sleeve so hard I felt her nails through the fabric. It's everywhere, she whispered. My mouth went dry. She was right. It wasn't just the spot we camped. It wasn't just our RV. This was the land itself. Alive. patient, sprawling beneath everything we could see. I thought of Clyde at the gas station, how he'd said the ground remembers who walks on it. Maybe it didn't just remember. Maybe it claimed. We pressed on, not because we had a plan, but because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant picturing that ripple rising beneath our feet. We followed a narrow spine of rock that cut along the ridge, jagged and sharp, like the back of something ancient turned to stone. Each step felt like threading a needle between survival and collapse. By midday, hunger gnawed at me. Our water was low. Mallory's lips had cracked in the cold, her pace staggering. I kept telling her, just a little farther, even though I didn't believe it myself. Then we found it. A clearing tucked against a cliff face, sheltered, with enough rock underfoot to feel safe. We collapsed there, backs to the stone, staring out over that endless ocean of trees. I could still see faint ripples in the distance, shifting slowly under the mist. We didn't talk for a long time. I don't know if it was exhaustion or fear that kept us silent. My mind wandered to the RV, the life we'd left in its cabinets and drawers, our photos, our clothes, our whole world devoured without a trace. It felt like a warning, but one I couldn't decipher. Then Mallory broke the silence. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "I heard it," she said. "What?" I asked, my throat raw. "Last night, before it took the RV, a voice." My stomach turned cold. "What did it say?" She hesitated. Her hands trembled against her knees. "It said my name, but it didn't sound right, like it was coming through the ground." I stared at her, unable to speak. "It sounded like you," she whispered. The words hollowed me out. I wanted to deny it, but I remembered the quiet last night, the way that thing just waited, watching, as if it already had us. Maybe it didn't need to move faster. Maybe it was inside us already, whispering through the dirt beneath our boots. That night, we didn't sleep, not even a little. We sat pressed against that cliff face, clutching the flare gun, watching the fog below shift and curl. The groaning came again, faint, rolling up through the forest like a tide, and with it, something worse, vibrations in the rock itself. Not enough to topple us, just enough to remind us that even here, we weren't above it. At some point, Mallory stood. I reached for her, panicked, but she didn't pull away. She just stared down into the fog and said, "It wants us closer." I grabbed her arm, shaking my head. No, Mal, don't." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "We can't stay here. It'll come up eventually." And she was right. Every instinct screamed it. This wasn't escape. This was a delay. I thought of the map again, of that useless piece of paper in my pack. Roads meant nothing out here. GPS was dead. But Clyde's voice echoed in my head, "Don't trust what looks solid." I looked down at the rippling earth, then up at the sharp peaks ahead, jagged and cruel, but unmistakably rock. Hard. Permanent. "Higher," I said, gripping her hand tight. "We go higher." She nodded, silent. And so we climbed again. As night bled back in, stars barely visible through thin streaks of cloud, we reached a pinnacle of bare granite. Wind howled here, a real wind, sharp and clean, and for the first time in days, I felt like the ground beneath my boots wasn't breathing. We collapsed against a stone outcrop, lungs on fire, hearts hammering. But down below in the fog, I saw it again. 2 glimmers. Not high this time. Not distant. Close enough that for one awful moment, I thought they were on the rock itself. I blinked. Gone. Then faint but clear, rising from the dark below, Mallory. My voice. But I hadn't spoken. Mallory flinched so violently she nearly stumbled backward off the rock. I caught her wrist, steadying her, but her eyes were wild, locked on the mist below where that voice, my voice, had drifted up. It didn't echo like sound. It pulsed, faint and deep, as if the ground itself had carried it. "I didn't say that," I whispered. "I know," she breathed, trembling, her nails digging into my arm. "I know you didn't." The silence after was worse than the voice itself. We both listened, afraid to move, afraid to speak. The wind clawed at the ridge, but beneath it, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it, there came another sound, a dragging, wet pull far below, closer than before, like mud shifting underfoot, like something enormous stirring. I scanned the slope, every nerve screaming. The fog below writhed in subtle spirals as though drawn toward a single point. And then in the center of it, I saw a shape rise, a mound, slow and deliberate, swelling from beneath like a blister forming under skin. Mallory gasped, "It's coming up." We stumbled backward along the granite ridge, boots scraping stone. The flare gun trembled in my hand. My mind screamed for escape, but where? Behind us, the peak narrowed to a knife edge, nothing but open air beyond. Ahead, that mound rose higher, its edges sloughing wet earth that slid down in rivulets, hissing faintly as it disappeared into fog. And then the voice came again. Louder, clearer, Mallory. This time, it was perfect. My tone, my cadence, like I was standing right beside her. She spun toward me in terror, her breath catching. I gripped her shoulders hard. "That's not me!" I hissed. "Look at me. It's not me." She nodded frantically, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face. But I could see the strain in her eyes, the pull of something deeper than reason. It wasn't just sound. It was like the earth below was trying to burrow into her mind, draw her down the slope. "Don't listen," I begged, pulling her back. "Stay with me. Higher. We have to keep climbing." But there was nowhere higher to go. The ridge ended here, jagged and sheer, dropping off into blackness on three sides. We were trapped. The mound below ruptured, not violently. Worse than that. It split with a slow, deliberate crack, wet earth peeling back to reveal a hollow cavity beneath. Fog poured into it, swallowed whole. And from its depths came a sound I'll never forget. Not an animal roar, not even a human cry, but something between the two. Low, resonant, vibrating in my bones as if the entire landscape was groaning awake. Mallory whimpered, burying her face into my chest, my arms wrapped around her instinctively, shielding her from the sight. But even with my eyes shut tight, I felt it, a slow, rhythmic pull beneath us, like a tide receding under stone. The ground shifted. I fell to one knee, clutching Mallory to keep from sliding. Pebbles skittered past us, vanishing into the mist. The granite itself trembled, fine cracks splintering outward underfoot. "Flare!" Mallory gasped suddenly, jerking upright. Her eyes were wild but sharp now, locked on mine. "You said we only had one left?" I nodded, heart hammering. "Use it." It was insane. A flare wouldn't stop whatever was beneath us. But I saw the fire in her gaze, the raw determination clawing past her fear. And I understood. It wasn't about stopping it, it was about calling someone else. I fired. The flare screamed skyward, a streak of searing red against the black. It burst overhead in a blossom of light that washed the ridge in color, burning away the shadows for just a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, I saw them. Shapes, not one, not two, dozens. Rising from the fog below, thin and tall, jointed wrong like marionettes in slow motion. Their heads tilted back to watch the flare burn out, faceless hollows fixed on us. Beneath them, the ground pulsed wet and alive, rippling outward from that cavernous split. Mallory screamed. I grabbed her hand. "Jump!" I shouted. There was no plan, no time, only instinct. We bolted for the narrow spine behind us, feet pounding granite, lungs on fire. The ridge shook beneath our boots, deep cracks spider-webbing in our wake. Behind us, the shapes moved, not running, not lunging, but rising step by step as if the land itself carried them upward. We reached the knife-edge peak, nothing but black air yawning on either side. Mallory hesitated, staring at me, panic in her eyes. "Trust me," I roared. We leapt. The world spun. Cold air tore at my face. Then impact. Hard, jarring, but real. We slammed into a lower ledge of rock, rolling painfully but alive. Above, the ridge groaned. A deafening crack split the air. I looked up just in time to see the granite peak collapse in on itself, swallowed by mist and shifting earth. And then, silence. No shapes, no voices, just the wind. For the first time in days, I heard wind. Mallory sobbed against my chest, trembling violently. I held her tighter, staring at the empty space above where we'd stood. The fog below churned one last time, then thinned, rolling back across the valley like a retreating tide. We stayed there until dawn. Real dawn this time, pale and weak but unmistakable. In the light, we saw it. In the distance, beyond the fractured ridge, a faint ribbon of gravel. A road. We stumbled toward it, broken and hollow, but alive. By the time our boots hit that gravel, I could barely walk. Every muscle screamed. My hands were raw, my knees bloody, but none of it mattered. I could have kissed the ground just for holding steady under my feet. Mallory clung to my arm, half limping, but her grip never loosened. We didn't dare stop until we heard it. An engine. A distant hum at first, then closer, the low growl of tires crunching gravel. I staggered into the middle of the road and waved my arms like a madman. A white pickup rounded the bend and braked hard, dust curling around it. A man leaned out the window, weathered face, graying beard, flannel jacket, the kind of Alaskan local you only see on stretches where maps stop being useful. "Jesus," he muttered, climbing out. "Where the hell did you two come from?" We didn't answer right away. Couldn't. Mallory just collapsed into the gravel, sobbing into her hands. I managed to rasp out, "We lost the RV. It's gone." The man stared at us like we'd spoken another language, then glanced past us at the peaks behind, the mist still clinging in streaks along the slopes. His jaw tightened. He didn't ask questions, just helped Mallory into the truck, handed me a thermos of coffee that felt like liquid fire down my throat, and said only one thing as we pulled away. "You should have never been out there." I didn't argue. I didn't even ask where we were. I just stared out the window as the wilderness peeled past, endless and indifferent, like it hadn't just tried to swallow us whole. But in the trees, I thought I saw it again, just for a moment, the faintest ripple in the soil beneath the spruce, small, waiting. We didn't talk much after that. Even when we reached town, an outpost so small it barely counted as one, neither of us could explain it. How do you tell anyone the earth itself felt alive? That it breathed? That it knew your name? We spent the night in a cheap roadside motel, bodies aching, minds raw. Mallory sat on the edge of the bed staring at her hands for what felt like hours. When I finally asked her what she was thinking, she said, "It wasn't just following us. It was pulling us. The whole time." I didn't sleep, not really. Every time my eyes closed, I saw that hollow split in the ground, heard that wet, dragging sound rising from below. I kept thinking about Clyde, the man at the gas station, how he'd warned us without really warning us. Don't trust what looks solid. We should have listened. Days later, when we finally filed a report about the RV, the ranger didn't blink. He nodded, scribbled notes, then said casually, "Happens more than you'd think. People don't see the terrain for what it is. Groundwater, sinkholes, frost heaves, it shifts under you. Out there, you stay too long in one place, it'll take you." But I saw his face when he said it, the tightness in his jaw, the way he didn't quite meet my eyes. Mallory hasn't gone back on the road since. Not really. She says she dreams about that voice sometimes, hearing me call her name from somewhere below the floor. And sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I feel it too. A vibration in the walls, faint and rhythmic, like memory pressing in from the ground beneath our feet. I still drive. I still camp. But Alaska, I can't look at it the same way. Out there, the beauty is sharp enough to cut you, and the silence isn't peace, it's patience. The land doesn't care who you are or how prepared you think you've come. It waits, it remembers. And if you give it enough time, it pulls. So if you're listening to this, if you're one of those people dreaming of untouched routes, of going farther, deeper, to places the maps forget, then listen to me. When an old-timer warns you about the land, believe him. When the ground feels wrong beneath your boots, turn back. And when that silence hits, when it's so deep you can hear your heart beating in your skull, don't stay. Because out there in Alaska's unseen wilds, the road isn't the only thing that ends. Sometimes it's just where the earth begins. I still remember the first time I saw the creek, glinting silver between the folds of the Smoky Mountains. It was late afternoon, the sun caught in that strange place between gold and gray, and I'd parked my RV at a primitive site not far from the Little Pigeon River. I'd been on the road for 3 weeks, restless, wandering without much of a plan, letting the Appalachian curves pull me deeper south until I found myself tucked beneath that mist-hung canopy. The Smokies had a way of swallowing sound, footsteps dampened by moss, voices carried off in strange directions. It was beautiful, but also unsettling in that way old forests always are. Too quiet, too aware, too old to really welcome you. I wasn't traveling alone in the strictest sense. My old college friend Nate had joined me for this stretch. He was 34, same as me, more into hiking than RV camping, but game for anything involving wilderness. We'd both needed a break from our lives back home. Me from a breakup that had left my apartment feeling too empty, him from a job he said was draining the marrow out of him. Funny, thinking back now, the way he said that. We laughed at the time, the two of us stepping out of the RV into air that smelled like wet leaves and cold stone. That smell that somehow feels clean and rotten all at once. The campground was sparsely populated, just a few rigs tucked under the trees and a trailhead leading off toward a network of backcountry routes. That's where it began. A narrow, unmarked spur trail ran parallel to the creek, the kind you almost miss unless you're looking for it. Nate saw it first and suggested we follow it after dinner, just for a quick walk before dark. I remember hesitating. There was something about the way it cut into the shadows, the site not like a trail so much as an animal path. But he was already pushing through, and I didn't want to be the cautious one. The air turned cooler as we followed it, the sound of water threading closer until we reached a clearing no bigger than a living room. The creek ran along one side, black and glassy in the fading light, and on the far bank stood something I still can't explain. It was a totem. At least, that's what I called it. Maybe 5 feet tall, made entirely of bone, thin, hollow bones lashed together in a lattice with sinew that looked petrified. Bird bones mostly, though a few were larger, too large to belong to anything local. The thing leaned slightly, like it had been there forever, its base sunk deep into mud and moss, and at its top, tied with some fraying fiber, was a skull no bigger than my fist. Human-shaped, but wrong. Elongated. The eye sockets too narrow. Jawline sharpened into an unsettling taper. It didn't feel man-made. It felt assembled. We didn't talk at first, just stared. I felt my pulse in my throat, the woods around us growing impossibly still. Then Nate grinned the way he always did when he wanted to break tension. "Creepy as hell," he said, stepping closer. "This is going to look wild on your dash." He meant it as a joke, but I felt my stomach twist when he wrapped his fingers around the shaft and wrenched it free from the mud. The sound it made, bones shifting, wet roots sucking free, echoed sharp against the quiet. We carried it back like idiots. I didn't even protest. Maybe I should have. Maybe if I'd been stronger then, we'd have left it where it belonged. But instead, we propped it against the RV that night, joking about how it looked like some Appalachian witchcraft thing. We drank a couple beers by the fire, laughed too loudly because the forest didn't give us anything back, and by midnight we turned in. That's when things started to feel off. I woke around 3. No sound, no dreams, just wide-awake stillness, my body heavy yet weightless at once. My hands tingled. My chest felt hollow, like my lungs were breathing air that didn't belong in me. And beneath that, stranger still, was the distinct sense that my bones weren't right. It's hard to describe. Not pain exactly, more like the awareness of something you should never feel. I lay there, motionless, telling myself it was just exhaustion, maybe dehydration from the hike. Beside me, I heard Nate breathing steadily, no sign he felt it too. But when I closed my eyes again, I dreamed of standing outside barefoot, the cold soil not sinking beneath my weight. The next morning, I laughed it off. We both did. Over instant coffee and eggs cooked over the fire, I told Nate how weird it felt, and he nodded, said he'd had the same thing. "Like my joints weren't connected, right?" he said, rolling his shoulders with a wince. We blamed the hike, the mattress, even the altitude, though none of that really fit. By midday, we'd nearly forgotten, driving out to a trailhead deeper in the park. The Smokies were gorgeous, wrapped in that drifting fog that makes the ridges look infinite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Every step I took was lighter than it should have been, like gravity had lost a fraction of its pull. That night, it got worse. I woke again, not from any sound, but from that same weightless sensation. I swung my legs out of bed, half expecting to collapse, but instead my feet barely pressed into the rug. I went outside, drawn by something I still can't name, and there it was, the totem leaning where we'd left it, its skull tilted toward me. And God help me, I swear I saw something move in the tree line, thin shapes flitting between the trunks, pale against the darkness. I froze, every instinct screaming to go back inside, but I couldn't. The forest felt expectant, like it was holding its breath. When I finally backed away, closing the RV door quietly behind me, Nate stirred. His eyes opened instantly, as though he hadn't been asleep at all. "You saw it too," he whispered. "Not a question, a statement." That's when I realized we were in trouble. By the third night, I stopped pretending we were imagining it. The sensation had grown impossible to ignore. Our bones didn't feel like they belonged to us anymore. When I walked, my steps barely pressed into the damp soil, and the sound of my feet on the RV floor was whisper quiet, unnatural. Nate noticed it too. We didn't leave prints near the fire pit anymore, even in the loose ash. That morning, while rinsing out a coffee mug by the creek, I realized my reflection looked blurred, almost translucent at the edges, as though the world behind me was bleeding through. We didn't talk about it much, not directly. Every time I opened my mouth to confront it, my voice came out hollow, distant, like it wasn't truly mine. Instead, we distracted ourselves with hiking during the day, hoping movement would ground us. But even out there, it felt wrong. Birds didn't scatter as we passed. Squirrels didn't bolt from branches. The forest seemed to flow around us instead, as if we'd become part of it without asking permission. And all the while, that totem leaned against the RV, the bone lattice catching light in ways that seemed sharper than they should. That evening, as the sun bled out over the mountains and mist filled the low places like rising water, I told Nate we should leave. He didn't argue, but he didn't move either. He just sat by the fire, staring into the dark where the trees began, as though something was calling him. His hands trembled faintly, fingers twitching like he was counting on them, but his lips didn't move. It scared me, the stillness in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely here anymore. That's when I heard it, a crack, soft and deliberate, like a footstep snapping a branch. Not far. I swung the flashlight toward it, nothing but fog and trunks stretching on forever. But when I killed the light, I saw it, or thought I did. A figure, tall and thin, almost glowing faintly against the blackness. Hollow. Its ribs were visible even from here, stretched like pale reeds beneath its skin. And its face? I didn't see eyes, just empty sockets that seemed to drink in the firelight. I wanted to shout, to bolt, but my body locked up. The figure raised one hand, skeletal and impossibly long, and pointed straight at me. My heart kicked so hard I thought I'd faint. But then Nate stood, slowly, and walked toward it. Not a word. Just steady steps crunching leaves that didn't sound right. Too quiet, like the ground no longer registered him. I lunged forward, grabbed his arm. It was cold. Not night air cold, cold like metal in winter. Lifeless. "Don't," I hissed, pulling him back. For a second, his face twisted, confused, then furious. His teeth bared. He yanked free and glared at me like I was the intruder. "We're supposed to go," he said. His voice sounded deeper, resonant, like two tones at once. I dragged him back to the RV. Somehow, he let me. We locked the door, drew the blinds, and sat in silence, listening. The footsteps outside didn't fade. They multiplied. Soft cracks and shifting leaves circled the RV, slow and patient. When I peeked through a slit in the blinds, I nearly gagged. There were more of them now. Half a dozen, maybe more, all standing at the tree line. Their limbs bent too sharply, their heads tilting in eerie unison. One of them stepped closer, and I saw its skin sagging like old parchment, clinging to those impossibly hollow bones. We didn't sleep. How could we? The forest whispered all night, windless, low like reeds through a flute. It wasn't words, not really, but it felt like language brushing the edge of comprehension. By dawn, the sounds had stopped. So had the figures. The clearing looked normal again, and that's when Nate said it. "I think they want us to follow." I should have left then, packed up, driven out without looking back. But something in me hesitated. It wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity, tangled with an ache I didn't understand. My bones felt light, my chest hollow. Every step felt easier, like the forest was stripping weight away that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. And God help me. A part of me wanted to see where it ended. That night, I hid the keys to the RV. I told myself it was to keep Nate from wandering off, but maybe it was for me too. The mist rolled in thicker than ever, clinging to the windows, swallowing even the firelight from our pit outside. Nate stood by the door, twitching. His breath fogged faintly in the air inside, even though it wasn't cold. "Do you hear it?" he whispered suddenly. I froze. "The hollow song," he said, smiling faintly. And then I did. A faint, reedy whistle threading through the trees, rising and falling like something breathing out there in the dark. It was the sound of bones singing. I can't describe that sound without feeling it crawl along my spine even now. It wasn't music in the sense we know it. It was too raw, too natural, like wind funneled through 1,000 tiny hollows, overlapping in a harmony that didn't belong to anything human. It called to something buried deep in me, something older than language, and for a moment I understood why Nate was smiling. It was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous. The song seemed to come from the creek, distant but unmistakable, threading through the trees like mist itself. Nate reached for the door handle, and I grabbed his wrist. His skin was pale, almost translucent, veins faintly visible like ink bleeding through parchment. He didn't even try to fight me this time, just looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pity. "They're waiting," he murmured. I didn't answer. My throat locked. When I finally let go, he opened the door. Cold air swept in, sharp and clean, carrying that hollow melody with it. He stepped out barefoot, not even glancing back. I followed him. God help me, I followed him, because being inside alone felt worse. The ground under my feet was damp, but I didn't feel it, didn't leave a mark. We moved toward the creek, guided by that eerie sound. The forest swallowed us, and every step felt lighter, easier, almost buoyant. The mist wrapped around us like a living thing, and I swear I felt shapes moving within it, long fingers brushing past, ribs like pale scaffolding in the fog. But I didn't stop. Neither of us did. When we reached the creek clearing, I saw them clearly for the first time. They were tall, impossibly so, their shoulders narrow, spines curved slightly forward. Their skin hung loose and pale, stretched thin over the bare suggestion of bones beneath. Their faces, if you could call them that, were gaunt, jawlines sharp, eyes empty sockets that still somehow watched. Each figure swayed slightly, as though a breeze passed through them I couldn't feel. And at the center of them, rising taller than the rest, stood another totem. Larger, more elaborate, its lattice of bones thin it seemed woven from air. Nate stepped closer. His breath was visible, even though I couldn't feel cold anymore. One of the figures moved forward, its motion slow, fluid, silent. It raised its hand, those fingers like lengths of willow, and touched Nate's chest. He didn't flinch. His body sagged slightly, like tension leaving all at once. And then I saw it. The skin over his sternum rippled. His ribs seemed to shift under the surface, parting slightly as if loosening from their joints. He gasped, not in pain but relief, and looked back at me with a serenity that was worse than terror. "It feels right," he whispered. I stumbled back. My own chest felt hollow, guess light, as though my bones were loosening too. The figures turned toward me, and I understood then they weren't pulling us in by force. They didn't need to. It was invitation, not abduction. But something in me fought. Maybe it was memory. Faces of people I'd left behind, my father teaching me to camp as a kid, that old sense of grounding in soil and sweat and weight. I bolted. I ran through the mist, heart hammering, every step so silent I felt like I wasn't even touching the earth. Branches whipped past, trees blurred, the hollow song chasing me like it knew my name. Behind me, Nate didn't call out. He didn't run after me. I didn't stop until I saw the RV through the fog, its pale shape like salvation. I slammed the door, locked it, collapsed against it, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. Outside, silence. No footsteps, no song, just the hum of blood in my ears. When dawn broke, Nate was gone. His boots were by the door, but no footprints led away. Not in the dirt, not even in the dew-soaked grass. The totem was gone too. I didn't pack. I didn't eat. I drove until the mountains fell behind me, until the fog was a memory and the road was flat and straight and loud under my tires again. But that night, parked at a rest stop miles away, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared of them following me, though I was, but because I still felt it. The hollowness. I looked at my hands under the fluorescent glow of the RV's ceiling light, flexed my fingers. They were thinner. My nails, pale. When I pressed against the skin of my forearm, it gave too easily, like there was less beneath it than there used to be. And worse, when I stepped out into the gravel lot to clear my head, I didn't leave footprints. I stared down at the gravel beneath my feet, frozen in place. The stones didn't shift. They didn't crunch. It was as if I weighed nothing at all. I crouched slowly, my breath trembling in my chest, and pressed my fingers to the ground. I could feel it. Sharp, cold, real. But when I pulled my hand back, there was no mark, no indentation where I'd been. I didn't sleep that night. I sat behind the wheel, staring out at the empty lot illuminated by buzzing sodium lamps. Trucks came and went, engines growling low in the dark, but nobody looked my way. I could have screamed and no one would have noticed. That thought wrapped around my ribs like a vice. By morning, I drove on autopilot, numb, unsure where I was even headed. I just needed distance, needed open roads and sunlight. But the sun didn't help. In the daylight, I saw it clearer. My reflection in the side mirror looked faded, the edges of me blending faintly with the trees behind. I pulled my sleeve up and stared at my arm. My veins were faint, barely visible, my skin thin enough to almost see the shadow of bone beneath. When I pressed my fingers to my sternum, I swore I felt more space than there should have been between bone and flesh. I told myself I was imagining it, that fear had gotten into my head. I stopped in a small mountain town, one of those places with a single gas station and a diner, and went inside just to see if anyone looked at me strangely. But the girl behind the counter didn't even blink. Didn't look me in the eye either. It was like she looked through me. I sat there over cold coffee for nearly an hour, testing my presence, lifting things off the table just to make sure I could still hold them. I could. But it felt wrong, as if my grip wasn't pressure so much as proximity. That night, parked along a quiet highway turnout, I dreamed of the creek again. Except it wasn't a dream. I woke standing outside the RV, barefoot, my breath fogging faintly even though the air was warm. My hands were empty, but I knew what I'd been holding. That bone totem. My fingers ached with memory, curled in phantom shapes, and then I heard it, the song again. Fainter this time, but unmistakable. Hollow, patient, calling. I backed toward the RV, fumbling with the handle. I locked myself inside and sat on the floor, shaking, my back pressed to the door. Hours passed. No sound but my own shallow breathing and the distant hum of the road. But as I sat there, I felt something else. My bones weren't still. They shifted, subtly, a creak deep inside as if my ribs were sighing, loosening a fraction more. I clutched at my chest, panic rising so fast I nearly blacked out. My mind raced back to Nate, to his peaceful expression as that figure touched him, to the way he'd said, "It feels right." What if he wasn't wrong? I drove for days without stopping except for gas. Every town looked the same. Every reflection blurred a little more. When I passed hikers or RVers on the road, I caught myself staring, wondering if they felt it too. If they'd heard the song somewhere out there in the woods, wondering if I was already gone and didn't even know it. And then came the night I saw Nate again. I'd pulled into another secluded turnout, an old Forest Service road in Tennessee. No lights, no noise, but the ticking engine cooling down. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, watching the tree line. The moon was low and red through the haze, casting the forest in bloody shadow. And then he stepped out from between the trees. He looked the same, but less. taller somehow, thinner, his face pale as chalk. His eyes were still his, but they were ringed in hollows that seemed to drink the moonlight. He didn't walk toward me. He didn't need to. His voice slid through the glass like it was inside my head. "You're almost ready," I screamed, full raw panic, and slammed the RV into gear. Gravel spat out behind me as I roared back onto the road, my tires skidding dangerously close to the ditch. I didn't look back, not once, but his words stayed. They still stay. Because now when I touch my skin, I feel the bones more than the flesh. When I wake at night, I can hear that hollow whistle threading through the dark, closer each time. And sometimes when I glance at the passenger seat, I swear I see an impression there like someone invisible is riding with me. I haven't stopped driving since. I don't think I can. Because if I do, if I park, if I rest, if I sleep too long, I know I'll hear that song clearly. And I know I'll follow it. The miles blur now. I can't tell you how many nights it's been or which state lines I've crossed. Every gas station, every diner, every rest stop feels like a waypoint between waking and something else. The world has gone quieter in ways I can't explain. Conversations sound distant even when I'm right there. The clink of a coffee cup on a counter is muted, dulled, like it's happening in another room. It's like I'm fading, slowly sliding into some space just outside the one everyone else occupies. And the strangest part, no one seems to notice me anymore. Not really. Clerks don't meet my eyes. Strangers don't brush shoulders as they pass. At a crowded RV park 2 nights ago, one of the big ones near the Blue Ridge Parkway, I stood by the communal fire pit, surrounded by people, and not a single head turned my way. It was like I wasn't even there. I keep testing myself. Touching things, picking them up, holding them. I can. I'm still here. But when I place my palm flat against a dusty table or the hood of my RV, it doesn't leave a print anymore. I used to think that was the worst part, but it's not. The worst part is the bones. I can feel them now more than anything else. My flesh feels absent, thin. When I lie down, I don't feel the pressure of my back on the mattress the way I used to. Instead, I feel the cold geometry of my skeleton beneath me, as though my skin is only loosely draped there. Sometimes, late at night, I hear them creak faintly like wood settling in an empty house. And always, that song comes back. Faint at first, then clearer. A low, hollow whistle rising and falling just past the edge of hearing, weaving through the hiss of tires on wet roads or the hum of the RV's generator. I keep telling myself it's the wind, that I've gone mad from exhaustion, but then I hear words beneath it. Not words I understand, just syllables, echoes, breathing through bone. 2 nights ago, I pulled off into a rest area along a dark stretch of highway. No lights, no noise, but the crickets and the occasional rumble of a distant semi. I sat in the driver's seat long after I killed the engine, staring at the tree line across the lot. My chest felt so light I half expected it to float away. And then I saw him again. Nate. He stood at the edge of the woods, just far enough that I couldn't see him clearly. But I knew it was him. His silhouette was unmistakable, tall, narrow, his shoulders angled strangely, like they'd drawn in toward his chest. He didn't move. He didn't need to. I could feel him watching. I locked the doors instinctively, even though I knew that wouldn't matter. And then I heard it. His voice, quiet and steady, slipping straight past glass and steel. "Why are you fighting it?" I couldn't answer. My throat locked, my body stiff. All I could do was grip the wheel and shake my head, violently over and over like a child refusing to listen. "You're lighter now," he said. "You feel it, don't you?" I did. God help me, I did. Every joint felt like it wasn't holding me together anymore, like I was a collection of parts held loosely in air. And then he smiled, though it wasn't exactly a smile. His face didn't move right, lips curling too thin, too sharp. He stepped back into the mist, and I lost sight of him. But even after he was gone, his voice lingered. That night, I dreamed of standing in the creek clearing again. The figures surrounded me, swaying gently in rhythm with that bone song, their hollow frames glowing faintly in the moonlight. One reached for me, its hand impossibly long, and as it brushed my chest, I felt my ribs shift, open like a door. The cold poured in, but it wasn't painful. It was liberating. I woke gasping, not in terror, but in longing. I think that's how it happens. You don't get dragged out there. You choose it. Not because you want to, but because something deep inside you already belongs to them. Tonight, I'm parked off an old logging road somewhere in North Carolina. The woods press close on both sides, black and endless. I can hear the creek in the distance, faint, carrying that same reedy song. I tell myself I stopped here to rest, but I know better. The door is unlocked. I keep glancing at it, waiting for it to open on its own. And maybe that's the truth of it. It's not fear that keeps me awake anymore. It's anticipation. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. The night air presses against the RV walls like a living thing. Every creak of the frame feels amplified, stretched into the silence between heartbeats. I sit at the tiny dinette table, staring out the window where the forest waits, dense and unbroken, the mist crawling low across the ground like pale fingers. I keep the lights off now. It feels wrong to burn them, wrong to push back at the dark when it feels like I'm becoming part of it. I should leave. I know that. I should turn the key, slam the transmission into drive, and put as many miles as I can between myself and this place. But I can't. My keys sit in front of me on the table, untouched, and every time I think about grabbing them, my hands don't move. They hover uselessly, trembling faintly, bones clicking softly inside. That sound, my own bones moving, should terrify me. Instead, it feels inevitable. There's no pain anymore, no resistance, just that weightlessness spreading deeper as if I'm being hollowed from within. And then I hear it. Not faint this time, not tucked behind engine noise or wind. Clear, close. The hollow song threads through the stillness, so sharp it seems to vibrate inside my chest cavity, as though my ribs themselves are singing in sympathy. It's not outside anymore, it's inside. I stand before I even realize I've moved. My bare feet make no sound on the floor, and when I glance down, I see it clearly. I'm not pressing into the rug. I'm floating, just a fraction, enough that my toes barely graze the fabric. I should be screaming, but I don't. I walk to the door and open it. The mist flows in instantly, curling around my legs, cool and damp but strangely soothing, almost welcoming. The forest beyond is alive with faint motion, slender figures moving between the trees, their pale forms shifting in and out of the fog. And there, by the creek, I see Nate. He stands taller than before, his limbs impossibly thin, his skin nearly translucent, veins like faint cracks beneath porcelain. His jaw tapers sharply now, his cheekbones high and gaunt, and where his eyes used to be are hollow recesses glowing faintly with moonlight. But somehow I know it's him. I know it in my marrow. He lifts a hand, beckoning. The song swells, vibrating through the soil, through the trees, through the hollow lattice of my chest. I step down onto the damp ground, and I feel nothing, not the chill, not the grit, not even the slight give of moss underfoot. The others emerge then, silent and patient. They line the creek's edge, each figure swaying gently like reeds in a current, their heads all tilting in unison as they watch me. The air smells faintly sweet, like rain on old stone. I take another step forward, and another. My body is light, effortless. When I reach Nate, he places his hand against my sternum. His touch is cool, steady, and in that instant, I feel everything give way. My ribs open without pain, a soft, yielding shift, and the night air rushes in. My chest fills not with breath, but with the hollow song itself, vibrating through bone until it's all I am. I can see the creek clearly now, the totem rising from its center. It's larger than I remembered, impossibly intricate, its latticework woven from hundreds, no, thousands of bones that gleam faintly under the moon. Shapes move inside it, slipping between the gaps, twisting, folding. They are part of it. I step into the water. It's not cold. It's not wet. It simply passes through me, as though I've already shed the parts of myself that once felt. The figures gather closer, and for the first time, I hear words in their song. Not in any language I know, but I understand them all the same. They're not commands, they're welcomes. I glance back once, just once, at the RV sitting silent among the trees, the last piece of the world I once belonged to. It looks foreign now, heavy, anchored, a thing of weight, of noise and struggle. And then I turn back. Nate's hollow voice threads through the night, low and soft, close to my ear, though his mouth doesn't move. Let it go. You don't need it anymore. And as the totem looms before me and the song reaches its peak, I finally understand what he meant back in that clearing on the second night. This isn't about losing yourself. It's about becoming something else entirely. I take his hand, and together we step into the bone light. And in that moment, I stop leaving footprints altogether. I've driven my Volkswagen across half the country, camped in deserts so empty that the stars pressed against the windshield, and parked on cliff edges where the wind felt like it could pry the van from the rock. But nothing prepared me for what I learned this summer. I decided to follow the trail of RV disappearances in America's national parks. It started with a map, just a folded, outdated Park Service map I picked up from a thrift store in Wyoming. Someone had circled places in red ink, small dots scattered from Arizona to Montana. At first, I thought they were campsites, but then I saw the dates written beside them. Not campground opening dates, disappearance dates. People don't like to talk about it. Officially, there's no RV disappearance epidemic. You search the news, you might get a couple of short articles, maybe a paragraph on a missing person who wandered off or abandoned their vehicle. But that map, it was crowded with red. Some of those marks were in places I'd driven past without thinking twice. The first one I went to was in Yellowstone, early June. The kind of morning where the cold feels damp in your chest and every breath condenses into a ghost in the air. I parked in a small turnout that overlooked the Lamar Valley. It was beautiful. Elk moving like shadows in the mist, distant hills rolling into blue haze. That's where the 2003 disappearance happened. A retired couple, Harold and June, parked their Class C in that exact turnout. A ranger saw them there around 6 a.m. By 10, the RV was still there, but empty. No signs of a struggle. Their coffee was still hot. June's glasses lay neatly folded on the table. They were just gone. I'd read the official report before coming. It said possible animal encounter, but no tracks were found. No blood, no clothing torn. The RV keys were still in the ignition. It made no sense. Standing there that morning, I told myself it was just a tragic accident. Maybe they went for a walk, got turned around, fell into a ravine. But as I leaned on the guardrail, I felt something I hadn't in all my years of camping. A prickling awareness, like I was being measured by something I couldn't see. The mist in the valley wasn't moving right. That's the only way I can explain it. You know how fog will drift with the wind, soft and steady? This seemed to push against the breeze, curling in slow, deliberate swirls. I thought maybe it was just the way the sun was hitting it, but every time I blinked, it felt like the shapes had shifted. I left before noon, telling myself not to overthink it, but I couldn't shake that crawling sensation. The second location was deeper into the backcountry of Glacier National Park. This one wasn't even on the main visitor map. You had to drive 30 miles of unpaved road, past trailheads no one seemed to use anymore. It took me 2 hours in the VW, the tires crunching over loose rock, the forest closing in so tight the sun barely reached the road. Here in 2011, a man named Daniel, a solo traveler like me, had been camped for 3 nights before he disappeared. His RV was found locked from the inside, his boots still under the table. No sign of forced entry. The strange part? A week after the search was called off, rangers reported finding the RV doors wide open and every drawer inside emptied onto the ground. When I arrived, the old campsite was barely recognizable. The fire ring was half buried in pine needles. A rusted folding chair lay collapsed in the brush. The air smelled of resin and damp soil, the kind of deep forest smell that makes you feel like you're standing somewhere older than the road you drove in on. I walked the perimeter, not because I expected to find anything, but because I needed to feel the space where it happened. That's when I noticed the quiet. No wind in the branches, no birds, not even the distant trickle of water. Just nothing. It hit me then how many of these disappearances were tied to places like this, spots where sound itself seemed to thin out, like the land was holding its breath. That night, I camped there in the VW. I didn't light a fire. The moon was enough to silver the roof and outline the trees in pale light. Around midnight, I woke to the faint sound of an engine. Not the roar of a modern truck. This was softer, older, like a carbureted engine idling. It seemed close, just beyond the tree line. I sat up, listening. It stayed steady for maybe 30 seconds, then cut off like someone had turned a key. When I opened the side door, the forest was empty. No headlights, no movement, just that same oppressive quiet. I shut the door and told myself I'd imagined it. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, I saw fresh tire tracks in the damp soil. Parallel lines about the width of an RV, and they led into the forest, straight between two trees far too narrow for any vehicle to pass. I left without breakfast. By the time I visited the third site, I'd stopped believing these were just coincidences. I reached the third location in mid-July, when the air hung heavy with the kind of heat that makes asphalt ripple in the distance. This one was in the Great Smoky Mountains, a place with a beauty so old it feels dangerous. There's a weight in those ridges, a sense that they've been here long before you and will be here long after you're gone. The spot was near an unmarked pull-off along a winding section of road. The map said the last disappearance here was in 1998, but the way the grass was flattened in places, it looked like someone had parked here recently. This time it wasn't a tourist couple or a solo hiker. It was a family, 2 adults, 2 kids, camping in a borrowed RV for the weekend. They'd been seen fishing down by a creek that morning. By dusk, a passing motorist saw their RV door swinging open in the breeze. When rangers arrived, they found something strange. The dining table was set for 4, but each plate had a fork balanced exactly in the center, tines pointing straight up. The ranger's report mentioned it as a curious detail. Nothing more. But I couldn't shake the image. Who stops mid-meal to arrange cutlery like that? I parked the VW in the same pull-off and walked down toward the creek. The forest was dense with a kind of shade that feels like stepping underwater. The creek itself was slow-moving, shallow, but the water was clouded with a faint greenish tint, almost metallic. Halfway down the bank, I froze. A child's shoe lay half-buried in silt, the sole curling upward. It was too small to belong to anyone who'd come through here recently. It had that brittle, sun-bleached look like it had been here for years. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand, and that's when I heard it. Laughter. Not close. Not loud. Just a faint, high-pitched giggle carried on the air from somewhere upstream. I told myself it could be hikers, maybe another family playing by the water. But there was no other vehicle parked on the road, and the sound didn't fade or grow closer. It stayed fixed, like it was coming from a place the creek itself was holding. The water at my feet swirled in lazy circles, and I suddenly wanted to be anywhere but there. I put the shoe back where I'd found it and walked uphill without looking back. That night, I didn't stay at the site. I drove into a small town on the edge of the park and checked into a roadside motel. The desk clerk was an older man, the kind who'd seen a lot but didn't speak much. I asked him if he'd ever heard of that family who disappeared near the creek. His expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked up from the register. "You don't want to go looking into that," he said. When I pressed, he told me something that made my skin tighten. "You're not the first one to come through asking questions. Most of them stop by here. None of them check out in the morning." I left before dawn, avoiding the creek entirely. By now, my route across the parks was less about sightseeing and more about chasing something I couldn't name. Each location felt heavier than the last, as if the disappearances were pieces of a single thing, one long shadow stretching across states. The fourth site was in Arches National Park, Utah. Remote. Blazing hot in the day, bone-chilling at night. I arrived just before sunset when the sandstone glowed like the inside of a furnace. This disappearance was from 2016, a man named Travis, camping in a refurbished Airstream. He'd told his sister he was planning to photograph the stars that night. His Airstream was found in the morning with the door locked from inside, tripod set up, camera missing. The campsite was down a narrow dirt spur road, barely wide enough for the VW. When I got there, I found the fire ring filled with fine black ash. No wood chunks, no half-burned logs, just that fine powder, like something had been burned to nothing. I set up my chair and watched the light bleed out of the sky. Arches is the kind of place where night falls fast, the heat escaping so quickly you can see your breath within an hour. The stars came out in sheets, so many they seemed to hum. Around 1 a.m., I woke in the van to a soft rattling. At first, I thought it was wind against the pop-top canvas, but it was too regular, too measured. I looked out the side window. The tripod was standing there, 10 feet from the van, though I hadn't brought one. It was old, aluminum legs, the kind you twist to tighten, and the camera on top wasn't mine. The lens was pointed directly at my window. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loud. For what felt like an hour, I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting for someone to come and claim it. But no one did. When dawn finally broke, the tripod was gone. That's when I knew I'd crossed some invisible line. This wasn't just research anymore. Whatever had taken those people, it had noticed me. By the time I reached the fifth site, my sense of caution had changed into something heavier, closer to inevitability. I wasn't just documenting where others had vanished. I was moving through the same spaces they'd stood in before they were gone, breathing the same air, feeling the same subtle wrongness press against my thoughts. This one was deep in Olympic National Park, Washington, the kind of place where the trees crowd each other like they're conspiring, their moss-draped limbs leaning over the trail as if to hear what you're thinking. The road into the campground wound along a narrow river, the kind of water that moves so slow it looks like black glass. In 2009, an RV had been found here, a 24-foot Winnebago parked at the edge of the loop, headlights still on. Inside, the table was scattered with playing cards, 3 hands dealt, but no fourth. The last cell signal the family had sent out was a blurry picture of what they claimed was a person standing in the river at dusk. Rangers said the figure in the photo was probably just a log or shadow, but they never found the family. I parked in the same loop. The air smelled of wet cedar and something faintly metallic, almost like old coins in the back of your throat. Even in daylight, the shadows between the trees felt dense, the green so deep it seemed to absorb the sound of my footsteps. I walked down to the river. The water was barely moving, carrying fallen leaves like slow, deliberate thoughts. Across the far bank, the fog was clinging low, spilling tendrils into the tree line. I told myself it was natural, but the shapes it made, narrow shoulders, long arms, lingered in my mind even after they shifted back into mist. That night, I decided to stay awake, to watch. I left the sliding door cracked just enough for a breeze. The van turned so I could see the river through the trees. Around 2 a.m., a sound woke me, faint at first, then clearer. A single splash, then stillness. It didn't repeat. It didn't echo. It was like something heavy had stepped into the water just once, and then waited. I held my breath, straining to hear. There was no wind, no insects, just that thick stillness pressing at my ears. And then I saw it. Not movement, absence. A shape darker than the rest of the night, standing midstream, its edges too sharp for fog. I closed the door without looking directly at it. Not because I thought it would go away if I ignored it, but because I didn't want it to know I'd seen it. By morning, the river looked as harmless as a postcard. But when I stepped outside, there were wet footprints on the ground. Bare, human-shaped, leading from the water to my van's door, and stopping there. I didn't stay to make coffee. I drove out, the tires spitting gravel until the trees thinned and the air lost that metallic taste. The next site wasn't far, but I wasn't sure I wanted to keep going. It was in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia, one of the older disappearance cases. The RV had been found abandoned in 1985, Food still cooking on the stove. The driver's side window rolled halfway down as if someone had started to speak to someone outside. The person who reported it said they'd seen lights in the woods like lanterns, but no one could explain it. When I arrived, the campground was empty, except for a single Class B parked near the entrance. No sign of people. I chose a spot near the tree line, telling myself I'd only stay one night. Twilight in Shenandoah comes fast. One moment the sky is open and pale, the next the woods are swallowing the light whole. That night, I lit a small fire, hoping the flicker would anchor me in the growing dark. That's when I saw them, small, round glows moving between the trees. At first I thought they were fireflies, but they didn't blink. They didn't waver. They just floated forward, slow and steady, weaving between the trunks in deliberate arcs. They drew closer. I told myself to look away, but my eyes locked on them, tracking each movement. They weren't coming straight toward me. They were circling. My fire cracked loud in the silence, and that's when I heard it. Soft, deliberate breathing, just beyond the reach of the light. I didn't move. The glows drifted in and out of sight, and the breathing stayed in place like it was waiting for me to step past the firelight. I stayed there until dawn, eyes fixed on the tree line. By the time the sun lit the grass, there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign anyone had been. But I knew better. At that point, the fear wasn't a spike anymore. It was a constant low current, buzzing in my bones. I was starting to wonder if these disappearances weren't random at all. If maybe every time someone came looking for them, they became part of the same pattern. And if that was true, maybe I'd already crossed the line. By the time I headed for the sixth site, I'd stopped checking the map as often. Not because I didn't know where I was going, but because I knew too well. Could feel each place before I reached it, like the air shifted, like my chest got heavier. This one was in the northern section of Grand Teton National Park, near a primitive camping area the Park Service didn't even bother to sign anymore. The road in was barely more than a pair of ruts through wild grass, the kind that brushes against your doors and leaves fine scratches you don't notice until the light hits them just right. The 1994 case here was different. The RV hadn't been found abandoned, it had been found burned. No sign of the couple inside, no bones, no trace of what started the fire. The strange part was the reports from campers on the opposite ridge. They'd seen the RV still intact late that night, headlights on, like the occupants were still awake. The fire seemed to have happened all at once, between one glance and the next. When I pulled in, the grass was waist-high in places, the old fire ring choked with weeds. I left the VW in the open and walked a slow circle around the area. There was nothing, no ash, no sign anything had burned. But as the wind shifted, I caught a faint whiff of smoke, not the sharp, dry smell of a campfire. This was different, denser, sweet, almost oily. I tried to tell myself it was coming from far off, maybe a prescribed burn in the park. But it stayed with me even as I walked 100 feet away. That night, the wind died completely. The air felt sealed, like I was sleeping under a dome. I woke at 1:17 a.m. to light flashing against the inside of the van. Not headlights, not lightning. It pulsed slow, 3 short, 1 long, 3 short again. I sat up, my eyes searching the grass. That's when I saw the glow. Not fire, not really. More like heat mirage light, shimmering in a perfect circle maybe 30 feet away. As I stared, the air inside that glow began to ripple harder, as if something was moving toward me through it. I closed the curtains and stayed perfectly still, my breath shallow, counting the seconds. At some point, the glow faded, but the smell of smoke stayed until dawn. By now, I knew I wasn't just visiting these places, they were marking me back. The 7th site was supposed to be my last. Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado, a place I'd always wanted to see, even without the dark history. But the disappearance here was one of the most unsettling. In 1977, a family of 4 in a small RV vanished from the campground without a trace. The Park Service found their site exactly as it had been. Chairs out, cooler half full, awning extended. Neighbors in the campground said they'd heard someone knocking on the family's RV door late at night. followed by quiet voices. The next morning, the RV was empty, the door still ajar. I parked in a similar loop, the sun dropping low enough to throw long shadows from the mesa walls. There was something about the silence here that was different, not the muffled, pressing quiet I'd felt in other parks. This was more like a pause, like the place itself was holding back, waiting for the right moment to move. I left the VW door open as I cooked dinner, trying to act normal. But as soon as night fell, the temperature dropped hard. My breath hung in front of me as I zipped the sleeping bag and tried to keep my eyes open. Sometime after midnight, I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow. Solid. Right on the side panel of the van. I froze. The knocks came again, this time on the sliding door. I reached for the flashlight, but before I could turn it on, a voice spoke. Soft, almost polite. "Can you let me in? It's so cold out here." It wasn't a child. It wasn't an old person. The tone was calm, flat, without the shiver you'd expect from someone freezing in the dark. I didn't answer. After a long pause, the voice came again, lower this time. "They'll take you if you don't." I sat there in the dark, my pulse in my ears, until the sun rose. When I finally opened the door, the ground outside was undisturbed, except for one thing. A set of bare footprints leading away from the van and stopping 10 feet out in the middle of nothing. That's when I knew. I wasn't just tracing disappearances. I was circling the same drain. The final site on the map wasn't far, but I'd already started to wonder if I'd make it there at all. I didn't drive straight to the last site. I told myself I needed supplies, fuel, food, maybe a night in a real bed. But the truth was I was stalling. Every mile closer, the knot in my chest tightened, like I was walking into a room where everyone had already stopped talking, waiting for me to arrive. The last mark on the map was in a section of Canyonlands National Park most people never see. No official campground, no maintained road, just a faded fire road winding into sandstone canyons where the sun doesn't touch the bottom until midday. According to the dates, this one was recent. Just 3 years ago, a man in his late 30s, solo traveler, small RV. His name was Evan. The Rangers found his rig parked in a sandy wash, no sign of struggle. Everything inside was neat, almost too neat. Bed made tight, cupboard doors all closed. But the weirdest part, a small stack of rocks, perfectly balanced on the driver's seat. It took most of the afternoon for me to reach the wash. The last stretch was slow going, the VW crawling over uneven rock. The walls of the canyon rose higher on either side, pressing the road into shadow. When I finally found the spot, I knew it instantly, not from the ranger's description, but because it felt wrong. The air was too still. The sand was undisturbed except for one long, narrow track that cut from the road into the canyon wall and simply ended at the stone. No footprints, no tire marks, just that single drag like something had been pulled. I set up camp, telling myself it would be my last night in this entire search. I'd make notes, take photos, then drive out before dawn. The sun dropped fast in that canyon. By the time I finished a quick dinner, the shadows had swallowed everything except the faint glow above the canyon rim. I sat in the van with the door open, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a sound, soft, deliberate like a foot brushing against sand. It stopped. Then came another. It wasn't steady. It wasn't random. It was paced. Slow, like someone taking a single step, waiting, then taking another. I reached for my flashlight but stopped when I saw the shape. Not in the canyon floor, but above, along the rim, a figure. Too far to see clearly, but tall, unmoving. I blinked, and it was gone. The sound came again, closer now, though the sand at my feet was still untouched. And then I heard it, low, steady breathing. Not in front of me, not behind, above. I leaned out, craning my neck toward the rim, and that's when something shifted in the dark. I didn't see it fully, just the suggestion of movement against the faint stars, but it was enough to send me scrambling inside. I slammed the door, locked it, and turned off every light. The breathing didn't stop. For hours, it moved around the van, sometimes above, sometimes impossibly close to the windows. Once, something tapped on the glass, slow and deliberate, like it was counting. Sometime after 3 a.m., silence fell. I stayed awake until the first gray light spilled into the canyon, then opened the door. There was nothing. No footprints. No drag marks. The sand looked untouched, except for one thing. Balanced on my driver's seat, just like an Evans RV, was a small stack of stones. No matter how careful I was driving out, the stones stayed stacked, not a single one toppling. That's when I stopped wondering if the map's marks were random. They weren't. They were steps, and I had just taken the last one. I didn't waste time that morning. Didn't make coffee. Didn't check my mirrors twice. I turned the key, felt the VW shudder awake, and rolled out of that canyon with the sun barely clearing the rim. The fire road looked different in daylight. Longer somehow. Turns sharper than I remembered. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure standing in the wash, just watching me leave. But the road behind me stayed empty. For the first 5 miles, I told myself I was in the clear. Then I noticed the odometer. It was ticking up slower than it should. The last 30 minutes of driving had added less than a mile. I told myself maybe it was mechanical, some fault in the gauge, but when I glanced out the window, the rock formations looked familiar. Not déjà vu familiar, exactly the same. The same twisted juniper leaning over the road, the same dark split in the sandstone. I was looping. I slowed, trying to get my bearings. The canyon here should have opened toward the main road. Instead, it seemed to draw inward, the walls leaning higher, narrowing above me. That's when I saw them, small stacks of rocks, just like the one on my driver's seat, lining the road on both sides. Each pile had 3 stones, perfectly balanced, spaced evenly apart. I kept driving. I didn't want to stop long enough to count how many there were. By midday, the sky had shifted, no longer the open, pale blue of the desert, but a washed-out gray, like the light was being strained through something heavy above me. My watch said it was noon. My body felt like it was late afternoon. Somewhere behind me I heard the first sound. A single knock, deep and hollow, like a hand against a door. It wasn't loud, but it carried, bouncing off the rock until it was impossible to tell where it came from. Then another. I gripped the wheel harder, jaw locked, and kept driving. The knocks followed, sometimes in pairs, sometimes in long, steady sequences that made the back of my neck go cold. I passed another rock stack. This one wasn't 3 stones, it was 4. The top one was smaller than the rest, tilted slightly toward the road like it was looking at me. I don't remember deciding to floor it, but I did. The VW rattled over the uneven road, suspension groaning, but I kept my foot down. I wasn't going to stop. Not here. Not now. Then, ahead, the canyon widened into a wash, sunlight spilling in. I thought I'd made it. I could see the edge where the road climbed out toward open desert. I hit the gas harder. The sunlight didn't get closer. The wash stayed the same distance ahead, no matter how far I drove. In the rearview mirror, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was dust, stirred up from my tires. But it wasn't dust. It was shapes. Tall, thin. The kind of silhouettes that, if you saw them far away in a forest, you'd call trees. But there were no trees here. And they were moving. Slow at first, then faster, keeping pace without sound. Their edges shimmered in the heat like they weren't fully solid. I stopped looking at the mirror. I kept my eyes on that sunlight ahead, my hands welded to the wheel. The knocks grew louder, now coming from both sides of the van. Not against the metal, inside it. Something brushed my shoulder from behind. I didn't look. I just drove. When the light finally shifted, just a fraction, just enough to feel like I'd moved forward, I realized my hands were numb on the wheel. My watch said it was 2:43 a.m. I'd been driving for 14 hours and was still in the canyon, and the stacks of rocks lining the road now had 5 stones each. The 5th stone bothered me more than the shapes in the mirror. I couldn't explain why. Maybe because it meant something was counting, keeping track of me the way I'd been keeping track of the disappearances. I drove until my legs cramped, until my eyes burned from squinting at the same stretch of road over and over. The canyon walls shifted subtly with each loop, as if they were learning my movements, closing in tighter, making the sky narrower. By the time I hit the next bend, the road dipped into a shallow basin, And that's when I saw it, an old turnout I recognized, not from the map, but from my own memory. Yellowstone, the first sight. The same mist curling in the valley below, pushing against the wind instead of with it. The same guardrail I'd leaned on months ago, wondering how a couple could vanish with their coffee still hot. Only now, there was no guardrail. No safe overlook. Just the turnout and the RV. It wasn't my VW. It was the couple's Class C. White paint sun-faded to cream, curtains drawn. The passenger door hung open, a faint creak carrying on the wind. I slowed, against every instinct telling me not to. The mist didn't just fill the valley now, it curled along the asphalt, spilling toward me in tendrils. Something inside me whispered, "If you stop, it's over." I kept the van rolling, eyes straight ahead. Out of the corner of my vision, I thought I saw movement in the open doorway, two figures standing just inside, but they weren't looking out. They were facing each other, still as mannequins. I pressed the gas and the road snapped back into the canyon. The rock stacks returned, now 6 stones high. I drove faster, another bend, another shift. The Great Smoky Mountains. The creek. The air here was heavy, humid, the metallic tang in the back of my throat again. On the bank, the child's shoe sat exactly where I'd left it, but this time there were 2, and both were pointing toward the water. I didn't stop. The road bent again, and I was back in Olympic, the slow black river glinting between trees. Something stood in the middle of the water now, closer than before, its edges sharp against the current, its head tilted, slow and deliberate, following me as I passed. The loops were tightening. Sites I'd visited months ago were folding in on each other, stacking like the stones, each return bringing me closer to something I didn't want to see. By the time I passed Shenandoah's tree line, the lights weren't floating anymore. They were on the road, evenly spaced, guiding me forward. I couldn't tell if they were leading me out or in. The knocks inside the van had stopped, replaced by something worse, breathing. Not loud, not labored, just steady. Like someone was sitting right behind me, patient, waiting for me to realize they'd been there a long time. I didn't look. The next curve brought me back to Canyonlands. The wash. My last sight. The sunlight spilling into the gap. Only this time, the wash wasn't empty. The figure stood in the center, tall and still, its outline warping in the heat shimmer. At its feet was a single stack of stones, 7 high now. I knew then the count wasn't random. It was steps, and the next one was mine. The breathing behind me stopped. I gripped the wheel, floored the gas, and drove straight at the light. For a moment, everything went white, blinding, silent, without heat or cold. When my vision cleared, I was parked on the shoulder of a highway I didn't recognize. The VW idled steady like nothing had happened. The map was on the passenger seat. Only now there was one more red circle, and it was around the spot where I sat. The highway stretched empty in both directions, heat rising from the asphalt in shimmering waves. No mile markers, no signs, just a straight, endless line. The engine purred like it had never strained over rocks, never bucked in the canyon's ruts. But my hands stayed tight on the wheel, my pulse still thudding in my ears. The map sat on the passenger seat, folded neatly. Too neatly. I didn't remember folding it. I reached for it, and the paper felt warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, even though the cab was cool. When I opened it, the red circles were still there, faded but legible. All the sites I'd visited, all the disappearances, and now a new one. It was marked in the exact curve of the highway where I sat, a thin red ring with today's date inked beside it. I looked up and down the road again. No other vehicles. No sound except the low hum of the engine. Something inside me whispered that I could tear it up. Burn it. Pretend I'd never seen it. But the memory of the rock stacks, the figure in the river, the knocks in the night, those weren't things you could unsee. And the truth was, destroying the map wouldn't erase the fact that I was already on it. I drove, hoping to put miles between me and that spot. The odometer ticked normally again, the scenery shifting. Sagebrush, scattered pines, distant mountains. But with every mile, a heaviness grew in my chest, as if something was holding on to me from far behind. By dusk, I saw lights on the horizon. For a moment, relief hit me. Finally, a town. Maybe I could get a room, a hot meal, a night with walls that weren't metal and glass. But as I got closer, the lights didn't look like a town. They were too high, too warm. Cabin lights, perched on a ridge that no map showed, just like the ranger's story I'd once read about in passing. They glowed steady, like they'd been waiting all along for me to see them. I didn't stop, didn't slow. I kept my eyes forward, my grip on the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. But in the corner of my vision, I could swear I saw a door open and someone step out. Hours later, when full night had swallowed the road, I pulled into a rest area. Just a cracked lot, a single light buzzing overhead, and a picnic table with peeling paint. I killed the engine and sat there, listening. No knocks, no breathing, just the low hum of the light and the distant chirp of crickets. I almost believed I was alone until I glanced at the passenger seat. The map was gone. In its place was a small stack of stones, 7 high. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the horizon until the sky paled, knowing I'd never really left any of those places. They'd folded in on me, tucked me into the same pattern as the rest. And if the truth of the disappearances was anything, it was this. They don't all vanish at once. Some of us get to drive a little longer. We just don't know when we'll take the last step.